December 18, 1944. Ardennes Forest, Belgium. The cold cut through Colonel Thomas Harrington's wool coat as he knelt in the snow. Before him, like a gutted beast, lay the blackened hull of an American Sherman tank. Its turret had been blown clear off, landing 15 yards away in a tangle of scorched metal. Smoke still rose from the carcass despite the freezing air, carrying the acrid smell of burned fuel, melted rubber, and something worse that Harrington refused to acknowledge. He ran his gloved fingers over the jagged hole in the Sherman side armor. The edges peeled outward like a blooming flower of steel. Clean penetration. One shot, the German 88 Nimamadi Michel had punched through the American armor like it was made of cardboard. "Tiger?" Harrington asked, though he already knew the answer. Captain Miller, his escort from 3rd Armored Division, nodded grimly. "Tiger at 900 yards, sir. Killed 3 Shermans in under 2 minutes before retreating. This was the first hit." Harrington stood, his knees protesting. At 52, he was too old to be kneeling in Belgian snow, but the Pentagon hadn't sent him to Europe for his comfort. The situation was dire. Hitler's surprise offensive through the Ardennes had caught the Allied forces completely unprepared. The Germans had broken through American lines with terrifying speed, spearheaded by their fearsome panzer divisions. In 4 days of fighting, the 3rd Armored Division had lost 73 Sherman tanks, 73 steel coffins, each with a crew of 5 young men. "Show me the others," Harrington ordered. They walked the battlefield as daylight faded. Tank after tank told the same story. German armor cutting through American steel with terrible efficiency. Harrington took photographs, made measurements, and collected shell fragments. The evidence mounted with each wreck they examined. By sunset, Colonel Harrington's notebook was full, his hands numb with cold, and his heart heavy with certainty. As darkness fell, he looked out over the field of American dead and felt the weight of what he must now do. "I've seen enough, Captain. I need to speak with General Eisenhower immediately." 3 hours later, Harrington stood in the map room of Allied headquarters. General Dwight D. Eisenhower's face was grim as he studied the photographs spread across the table. The Supreme Allied commander looked as tired as Harrington felt, the weight of command etched into the lines of his face. "These are your conclusions, Colonel?" Eisenhower asked, tapping Harrington's report. "Yes, sir. The Sherman is fatally outclassed by German heavy armor. The Tiger and Panther tanks possess superior firepower, armor protection, incomparable mobility despite their greater weight. Our current doctrine of numerical superiority is failing. We're losing 5 Shermans for every German tank destroyed." Eisenhower frowned. "That's a bold statement, Colonel." "It's the truth, sir. I've spent 2 days examining battlefield wreckage. The evidence is irrefutable." Harrington pointed to a photograph of a Sherman with its side blown open. "That tank was hit at nearly 1,000 yards. The German 88 mm gun can penetrate our armor at twice that distance. Our 75 mm guns can't penetrate their frontal armor at any practical combat range." Eisenhower was silent for a long moment. "This isn't the first time you have made these arguments, is it, Colonel?" Harrington met the general's gaze steadily. "No, sir. I submitted my first report on the inadequacy of the Sherman's armor and armament in June of 1942. And now here we are. December 19, we're having the same conversation while men die in inadequate tanks." Eisenhower's voice was quiet but carried an edge of steel. "Tell me, Colonel, what did they call you at the Pentagon after that first report?" Harrington's jaw tightened. "Some called me a pessimist, sir. Others used less flattering terms." "They called you the traitor," Eisenhower said bluntly, "for daring to criticize American industrial might, for suggesting that our tanks might not be the best in the world." He shook his head. "And now I'm forced to ask the so-called traitor to help me fix this mess." Harrington stood a little straighter. "I serve where needed, General." "Good." Eisenhower looked at his watch. "Get some rest, Colonel. Tomorrow morning at 0800, you and I are meeting with General Marshall. It's time to discuss the Pershing." In the temporary officers' quarters, Harrington sat alone on his cot. The small room was cold, but he barely noticed. From his breast pocket, he withdrew a worn photograph and stared at the young face smiling back at him. Second Lieutenant Robert Harrington, his son, dressed in his tank commander's uniform, standing proudly beside his new Sherman. "I'm sorry, Bobby," he whispered to the empty room. "I tried to warn them." The memories flooded back unbidden. June 1944, 1 week after D-Day. The telegram that changed everything. "The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Second Lieutenant Robert T. Harrington, was killed in action in defense of his country in France, 14 June 1944. Robert had been commanding a Sherman during the breakout from Normandy when his tank was hit by a German Tiger. The official report said death had been instantaneous, a small mercy perhaps, but cold comfort to a father who knew the truth about the Sherman's vulnerabilities. The same vulnerabilities he had reported 2 years earlier, only to have his findings dismissed and his reputation tarnished. The Army had sent him Robert's personal effects, among them a letter addressed to Dad, never mailed. Harrington had read it 100 times since then. He knew every word by heart. "We faced a Tiger today. Couldn't penetrate its armor even at close range. 4 Shermans lost before we finally flanked it. The men call our tanks Ronsons because they light first time, every time when hit. Remember your report that got you in so much trouble? You were right, Dad. I wish they had listened to you." Harrington carefully returned the photograph to his pocket. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new arguments with men who didn't want to hear the truth. But tonight, in the quiet darkness, he allowed himself to feel the full weight of his failure. Not as a colonel, but as a father who couldn't protect his only son from the flawed machines he had tried to improve. Eleanor had never forgiven him. His wife of 30 years had retreated into grief after Robert's death, blaming the Army, the war, and ultimately Thomas himself. "You and your tanks," she had said the day he left for Europe. "They took our son, and now they're taking you again. There won't be anything left for me to bury." Harrington removed his boots and lay back on the cot, not bothering to undress further. Sleep would be elusive tonight, as it had been every night since that telegram arrived. But tomorrow demanded clarity. Tomorrow demanded strength. For Robert, he would finish what he started, no matter the cost. The meeting room at Allied headquarters buzzed with tension the next morning. Harrington stood at attention as Generals Eisenhower and Marshall entered, followed by a cluster of staff officers. General James Marshall, not related to the famous George Marshall, was the Army's chief of ordnance development and a man Harrington knew by reputation as brilliant but cautious. "At ease, gentlemen," Eisenhower said, taking a seat at the head of the table. "Colonel Harrington, your assessment, please." For the next 15 minutes, Harrington laid out his findings in precise, unflinching detail. The Sherman's inadequate armor, its underpowered gun, the catastrophic losses in recent engagements. The room grew quieter with each statistic, each photograph of destroyed American tanks. When he finished, General Marshall spoke. "Your analysis matches our own internal assessments, Colonel. The question is, what to do now?" He nodded to an aide who distributed folders stamped top secret to everyone at the table. "Gentlemen, it's time to discuss the T-26E3 program, now designated M26 Pershing." Harrington opened the folder and felt a surge of hope as he studied the technical specifications. The Pershing was everything the Sherman was not. A 90mm main gun capable of defeating German armor, sloped frontal armor providing protection against the German 88, and a new torsion bar suspension for improved cross-country mobility. "We currently have 20 Pershings completed," Marshall continued. "They're being prepared for shipment to Europe as we speak. The first units should arrive at Antwerp by late January." 20 tanks won't change the course of the war," one of the staff colonels objected. "No," Eisenhower agreed, "but they could prove the concept. If the Pershing performs as expected, we can accelerate production and begin replacing Shermans by spring." "There's opposition at home," Marshall warned. "General Blackwell still believes the Sherman is adequate when supported by tank destroyers." Harrington couldn't remain silent at that. "General Blackwell's doctrine is failing on the battlefield, sir. Tank destroyers are lightly armored and vulnerable. They can't keep pace with advancing armor, which is why our tankers are facing Tigers alone." The room fell silent. Everyone knew Frank Blackwell was the man who had buried Harrington's original report and championed the continued production of Sherman tanks. He was also one of the most powerful men in the Pentagon, with close ties to both the arms industry and key members of Congress. Eisenhower broke the silence. "Colonel Harrington, you've been warning about these issues longer than anyone. I'm assigning you to head Project Iron Shield, effective immediately." "Sir?" Harrington asked, surprised. "We need those 20 Pershings deployed and fighting as soon as they hit European soil. You'll oversee their delivery, crew training, and combat deployment. You'll have full authority to select crews and develop tactical doctrine." Eisenhower's gaze was steady. "I want those tanks making a difference in February, not sitting in depots while bureaucrats debate their merits." "I understand, sir. Thank you for the opportunity." Don't thank me yet, Colonel, Eisenhower warned. You'll be operating with minimal support and maximum scrutiny. Blackwell has friends everywhere, and he won't appreciate you proving him wrong. With respect, sir, my concern isn't General Blackwell's feelings. It's making sure no more young men die unnecessarily in inadequate tanks. Marshall slid a second folder across the table. Your preliminary roster of personnel. We've identified experienced tank commanders from units that have engaged German heavy armor. Men who have survived encounters with tigers and panthers. Harrington opened the folder and scanned the list of names. His finger stopped on one. Captain Michael Sullivan, 3rd Armored Division. A note beside the name caught his attention. Sole survivor, Company B, 33rd Armor Regiment, June 14, 1944. Robert's company. Robert's date of death. Colonel? Eisenhower prompted, noticing Harrington's sudden stillness. No issues, sir, Harrington said, closing the folder. I'll begin immediately. Good. This operation remains classified. We can't afford to alert the Germans that we're fielding a new heavy tank. Understood? The meeting concluded shortly thereafter. As Harrington gathered his papers, General Marshall approached him privately. I read your 1942 report, Marshall said quietly. It was brilliant, thorough, and absolutely correct. What happened wasn't right. Thank you, sir, Harrington replied stiffly. But that's ancient history now. Is it? Marshall raised an eyebrow. Because I suspect this mission is as much about redemption as it is about tanks. Harrington met the general's gaze. My son died in a Sherman, General. 6 months after I warned the Army it was inadequate. So yes, this is personal. Does that concern you? On the contrary, Marshall said, it reassures me. I need someone who won't take no for an answer. He glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. Blackwell has already caught wind of this project. He's sending one of his men to assist you. Lieutenant Colonel William Prescott arrives tomorrow. A spy, you mean? Almost certainly. Watch him carefully. Marshall turned to leave, then paused. One more thing, Colonel. We're calling this team Phoenix Rises on the official paperwork. Seemed appropriate. Phoenix Rises. Rebirth from the ashes. Harrington felt a chill that had nothing to do with the December cold. How much did Marshall know about Robert? The designation is apt, sir, was all he said. 2 days later, Harrington stood in a muddy field outside a requisitioned French farm that would serve as the headquarters for Project Iron Shield. The morning fog hung heavy over the landscape, shrouding the distant hills in ghostly white. Military trucks were arriving, disgorging men and equipment into the organized chaos of a new command being established. Harrington watched as a jeep approached through the fog, stopping before him. A tall captain with a weather-beaten face climbed out and saluted crisply. Captain Michael Sullivan reporting as ordered, sir. Harrington returned the salute, studying the man who had served with his son. Sullivan was perhaps 30, with the hard eyes of a soldier who had seen too much. A jagged scar ran from his left temple to his jaw, still pink with recent healing. Welcome to Project Iron Shield, Captain. Walk with me. They moved away from the bustle of the camp toward the edge of a bare orchard. Harrington could feel Sullivan's curiosity and wariness. Good. The man wasn't a fool. You commanded a Sherman in the 33rd Armor Regiment, Harrington said. Not a question. Yes, sir, until last June. When your company was hit by tigers near St. Lo, Sullivan's jaw tightened. We lost 9 tanks in under 5 minutes, sir. 41 men. I was the only survivor from my platoon. Harrington stopped walking and turned to face the captain. Lieutenant Robert Harrington was your company executive officer. Understanding dawned in Sullivan's eyes. You're his father. I am. Sullivan stood straighter. Sir, your son was a fine officer. The men respected him enormously. I didn't bring you here to hear platitudes about my son, Captain. I brought you here because you survived an encounter with German heavy armor. Because you know firsthand the deficiencies of the Sherman. Harrington's voice was clinical, professional. He couldn't afford emotion now. What do you know about the T-26 program? Sullivan blinked at the abrupt change of subject. Only rumors, sir. A heavier tank with better armor and a 90-millimeter gun. Those rumors are about to become your reality. Harrington handed Sullivan a thin folder. The M26 Pershing, 20 units arriving next month. You're going to help me train their crews and develop combat doctrine. Sullivan scanned the technical specifications, his eyes widening. This could have saved my company, sir. Yes, it could have. Harrington turned away, looking out over the misty fields. But it didn't, because men like General Blackwell buried the development program and insisted the Sherman was good enough. He took a deep breath, controlling his anger. We can't change that now, but we can ensure it doesn't happen to the next company that faces a tiger. Sullivan was quiet for a long moment. With respect, sir, why you? Word is you haven't commanded tanks in combat since the last war. A fair question. Harrington turned back to face the younger officer. Because I've spent the last 5 years trying to get the Army to build better tanks. Because I know more about German armor capabilities than anyone else in the European theater. And because General Eisenhower believes I'm the only one stubborn enough to make this work, despite the bureaucracy. And despite General Blackwell, Harrington's eyes narrowed. You know about that? Sullivan's expression hardened. Everyone in armor knows about Blackwell, sir. The tank destroyer doctrine was his baby. He's the reason we're still driving Shermans against Tigers. His voice took on an edge. The men call him the Butcher of Detroit because he keeps the factories building the same death traps while collecting his consulting fees from the manufacturers. That was dangerously close to insubordination, but Harrington let it pass. The anger was justified, and he needed Sullivan's honesty more than his discretion right now. General Blackwell is sending his aide to assist our project. Lieutenant Colonel Prescott arrives today. Sullivan cursed, then caught himself. Sorry, sir, but this project is dead before it starts if Blackwell has his man watching us. Perhaps, Harrington smiled thinly, or perhaps Lieutenant Colonel Prescott will find himself too busy with administrative duties to interfere with our real work. He gestured back toward the farm. I'm placing you in charge of crew selection and training. Find me the best tankers in the European theater, Latin. Men who have faced tigers and lived. Men who understand what we're up against. And the team name, sir? Phoenix Rises? Sullivan asked, glancing at the folder. Seems a bit theatrical. Harrington's expression didn't change. The Phoenix rises from ashes, Captain, just as we will rise from the failures of the past. What he didn't say was that the Phoenix was also reborn through sacrifice. The ancient symbol had been Robert's favorite since childhood, a fact Marshall had almost certainly known when choosing the designation. The message was clear. This project was both a rebirth and a memorial. I'll start reviewing personnel files immediately, sir, Sullivan said. Good, we have 6 weeks until the first Pershings arrive. I want crews selected and preliminary training begun within 10 days. As Sullivan walked back toward the farm, Harrington remained alone in the orchard. The fog was beginning to lift, revealing the winter bare branches reaching toward a cold blue sky. 6 weeks to prepare. 6 weeks to ensure Robert's death hadn't been entirely in vain. He wouldn't fail again. Lieutenant Colonel William Prescott arrived that afternoon in a staff car bearing Pentagon markings. He was younger than Harrington had expected, perhaps 40, with a meticulously pressed uniform and the confident bearing of a man accustomed to moving in powerful circles. Colonel Harrington, he said, offering a firm handshake. An honor to meet you, sir. Your work on armor tactics was required reading at the War College. Welcome to Project Iron Shield, Colonel Prescott, Harrington replied, measuring the man. I trust your journey was uneventful. As uneventful as any journey can be in a war zone, sir. Prescott smiled easily, too easily for Harrington's liking. General Blackwell sends his regards and his full support for this important initiative. Lies within the first minute, not a promising start. Generous of him, considering his historical opposition to heavy tank development. Prescott, I didn't miss a beat. The general's position has evolved based on battlefield data. Sir, he's quite eager to see the Pershing's performance metrics. I'm sure he is. Harrington gestured toward the farmhouse that served as headquarters. You'll be my executive officer, Colonel. Your first task is to establish our secure communication protocols and supply chain. I want daily updates on the Pershing's Atlantic crossing. If there's even a day's delay, I need to know immediately. Of course, sir. Prescott glanced around at the bustling activity. I was under the impression this was primarily a training operation. Your preparations seem more extensive. This isn't a training operation, Colonel. It's a combat deployment. Those 20 tanks will be in action against German armor within days of their arrival. Harrington fixed Prescott with a hard stare. If that conflicts with any guidance you received from General Blackwell, now is the time to say so. A flicker of something, surprise perhaps, or calculation, crossed Prescott's face before his professional mask returned. No conflict, sir. I'm here to help in any capacity required. Good, because we're going to need every ounce of support we can get. Harrington turned and walked toward the headquarters building, gesturing for Prescott to follow. Let me be absolutely clear, Colonel. The only metric that matters is how many American lives these tanks save. Not production schedules, Not budgets, not doctrinal purity. Lives saved. That's how we measure success. Understood, sir. Harrington doubted that very much, but it was a start. Inside the farmhouse, maps covered the walls of what had once been a dining room. Red pins marked the current German armor concentrations. Blue pins showed American armored units. The disparity was sobering. Our current situation, Harrington explained, the 3rd Armored Division has lost over 40% of its Sherman tanks since the Ardennes offensive began. The 9th Armored is in similar shape. Replacements are en route, but they're just more Shermans. Prescott studied the map. And you plan to deploy the Pershings to which unit? Both. 8 to the 3rd, 7 to the 9th. Harrington pointed to a sector near Cologne. Initial operations will focus here, where German Tiger battalions have been most active. The remaining 5 Pershings will be held in reserve for crew training and tactical development. Only 20 tanks total, Prescott mused. Hardly enough to make a strategic difference. We don't need to make a strategic difference, Colonel. We need to prove the concept so that production can be accelerated. Harrington tapped the map. Each of these blue pins represents 5 Sherman tanks. Each red pin represents 1 German Tiger or Panther. We're losing 5 tanks for every one we kill. That's not a sustainable exchange rate. And you believe the Pershing can reverse that ratio? I believe the Pershing can fight a Tiger on equal terms. That alone would be revolutionary. Harrington turned to face Prescott directly. The question is whether the Pentagon will acknowledge that reality or continue to insist that quantity trumps quality while our men burn in inadequate tanks. Prescott maintained his neutral expression. I assure you, Colonel, General Blackwell wants what's best for our armored forces. Then he's had a remarkable change of heart since June 1942, Harrington replied coldly. Show Colonel Prescott to his quarters, Sergeant, he ordered a passing NCO. We'll continue our discussion at the 1700 staff briefing. As Prescott left with the sergeant, Captain Sullivan entered from a side door. He'd clearly overheard at least part of the conversation. Blackwell's man through and through, Sullivan observed quietly. Without question, Harrington agreed. Keep an eye on him, Captain. I want to know who he communicates with and how often. Nothing he does goes unreported. Yes, sir. And the crew selection is progressing. I've identified 30 tank commanders with Tiger engagement experience. Interviewing them personally starting tomorrow. Good. Focus on men who understand the weaknesses of the Sherman, men who have lost friends to German armor. They'll appreciate the Pershing's capabilities most. Sullivan hesitated. Sir, about Lieutenant Harrington. That subject is closed, Captain. With respect, sir, you should know the truth about what happened that day. Harrington felt a cold weight settle in his chest. The official report said my son died instantly when his tank was hit by an armor-piercing round. That's not what happened, sir. Sullivan's voice was quiet but firm. Lieutenant Harrington's tank was disabled, not destroyed in the initial hit. He got his crew out safely. Then he went back for a wounded man trapped in another tank. The world seemed to tilt beneath Harrington's feet. What? The 2nd Sherman was burning. One of the loaders was pinned inside. Your son went back to help. That's when the Tiger fired again. Sullivan met Harrington's gaze steadily. He saved 4 men that day, sir. Would have been 5 if he'd had more time. Harrington turned away, unable to speak for a moment. The image was too vivid. Robert climbing back into a disabled tank, knowing the danger, determined to save 1 more man. It was exactly the kind of thing his son would do. Exactly the kind of heroism the Army expected of its officers. Exactly the kind of death that might have been prevented with better tanks. Why isn't this in the official report? Harrington finally asked, his voice rough. The chaos of battles, sir. Communications were down. By the time the after-action reports were compiled, the survivors had been scattered to different replacement units. Sullivan paused. And some officers prefer simplified accounts that don't raise uncomfortable questions about equipment failures. The implication was clear. Someone had sanitized the record of Robert's death, removing details that might reflect poorly on the Sherman's combat performance. Thank you for telling me, Captain, Harrington said quietly. My son deserved better than a sanitized death. He deserved a better tank, sir. Sullivan's voice had an edge of anger. We all did. Yes, Harrington straightened his shoulders. And that's exactly what we're going to deliver, no matter who tries to stop us. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of activity. The farmhouse transformed into a proper military headquarters. Personnel arrived daily. Tank commanders, gunners, drivers, maintenance crews, all handpicked by Sullivan from units that had faced German heavy armor. Maps and tactical diagrams covered the walls. A secure communications center was established in what had once been the farm's root cellar. Harrington divided his time between administrative work and the development of new combat doctrine for the Pershing. The tank's capabilities demanded fresh thinking. Its 90mm gun could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at combat ranges. Its own armor could withstand hits that would destroy a Sherman instantly. It was a true heavy tank, America's first, and it required tactics worthy of its potential. Prescott, meanwhile, performed his duties with efficient precision while watching everything. Harrington caught him examining the personnel files late one night, paying particular attention to the combat records of Sullivan and the other tank commanders. The next day, Prescott requested permission to establish direct communication with General Blackwell's office to expedite supply requisitions. Harrington denied the request. "All communications go through standard channels, Colonel. We can't risk operational security." Prescott accepted the decision with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. That evening, Sullivan reported seeing Prescott using a radio in his private quarters after hours. The message content was unknown, but the timing was suspicious. "He's reporting to Blackwell," Harrington concluded. "Question is, what exactly is he reporting?" The answer came 3 days later, when a telegram arrived from General Marshall in Washington. Pentagon sources question: necessity of accelerated Pershing deployment. Stop review committee. Being formed to evaluate program viability. Stop recommend immediate operational results upon equipment arrival. Stop Marshall. Prescott had been busy indeed. A review committee meant delays, and delays meant more men dying in Shermans while Pershing sat in depots. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Harrington told his staff that evening. "The first shipment of Pershings arrives in Antwerp on January 20th. I want crews fully trained and ready to deploy by January 25th. "Sir, that's barely 5 days for familiarization and tactical integration," one of the training officers protested. "5 days is what we have, Major. The alternative is watching those tanks get sidelined by bureaucrats while more Sherman crews die." Harrington's tone left no room for argument. "Captain Sullivan, what's the status of your mock-up training program?" Sullivan stepped forward. "We've constructed full-scale wooden replicas of the Pershing's interior, sir. Crews are already practicing loading drills, driver controls, and turret operations. By the time the actual tanks arrive, they'll know their positions by muscle memory." "Excellent. And the tactical simulations?" "Completed for 3 core scenarios: meeting engagement with Panthers, defensive positions against Tiger formations, and urban combat in restricted terrain." Sullivan pointed to a large tactical map. "We're running daily exercises using captured German tank data for accurate engagement parameters." Harrington nodded approvingly. Sullivan had exceeded expectations at every turn. The young captain's intensity was matched only by his thorough understanding of armored warfare. The men respected him, both for his combat experience and his uncompromising standards. "Colonel Prescott, what's the status of our maintenance preparations?" Harrington asked. Prescott consulted his clipboard. "Parts requisitions are complete, sir. Maintenance crews have been studying the technical manuals. However, I must note that the accelerated timeline creates significant risk. Proper integration of a new weapon system typically requires months, not days." "Noted, Colonel, but we don't have months. The enemy doesn't give us that luxury." Harrington turned to address the entire staff. "Gentlemen, I understand the pressure we're under. I understand the risks, but every day we delay is another day American tank crews face Tigers in inadequate vehicles." He paused, looking at each man in turn. "This isn't about proving a point or vindicating a theory. This is about saving lives, the lives of men like those you served with, men who deserve better than what we've given them so far." The room was silent. These officers had all seen the reality of armor combat in Europe. They'd all lost friends to German tanks. They knew what was at stake. "That will be all for tonight, gentlemen. Dismissed." As the staff filed out, Harrington caught Sullivan's eye and nodded slightly toward Prescott, who was gathering his papers. Sullivan understood immediately. He would ensure Prescott didn't have an opportunity to send any unauthorized communications tonight. When everyone had left, Harrington remained alone in the map room, studying the disposition of German armor across the front. Somewhere out there, Tigers and Panthers were waiting. The question wasn't whether the Pershing could defeat them. The technical specifications made that clear. The question was whether the Army would allow the Pershing to fight at all. Blackwell had too much invested in the status quo. His reputation, his doctrine, His relationships with manufacturing contractors, all were tied to the Sherman and the tank destroyer concept. The Pershing threatened to render his entire strategic approach obsolete. A man like that wouldn't surrender his position easily. That night, as a January storm lashed the farmhouse with sleet, Harrington sat alone in his quarters writing a letter to Eleanor. It was the fifth draft. The words still didn't come easily. Eleanor, I hope this letter finds you well. Winter in France is brutal this year, though I suppose no more so than usual. The local farmers say it's the coldest they can remember, but I suspect they say that every winter. I'm leading a new project that could save many American lives. I wish I could tell you more, but security restrictions prevent it. What I can say is that this may be the most important work I've done in my military career. I think about Robert every day. Captain Sullivan, who served with him, told me how he died. Our son was a hero, Eleanor. He saved 4 men before going back for a 5th. It was the kind of selfless courage that makes me prouder than I can express, even through the grief of losing him. Sullivan also confirmed what we suspected. Robert died because the Sherman tank was inadequate against German armor. The official reports sanitize that truth. I'm working to ensure no more sons die because of that same inadequacy. It's too late for Robert, but not for thousands of others. I know you blame me for his death, for encouraging his interest in tanks from childhood, for supporting his application to the Armor Officer School instead of a safer assignment. Perhaps you're right. I live with that possibility every day. I miss you, despite everything, despite the silence between us these past months. I miss the life we had. When this war is over, perhaps we can find a way forward together. If not, I understand. Some wounds may be too deep to heal. With love, still Thomas. He folded the letter and slipped it into an envelope, then added it to the small stack in his drawer. Letters written but never sent. Eleanor had made it clear after Robert's funeral that she wanted no more communication while he remained in the army. You chose tanks over our son, she had said. Now you're choosing them over me. The unfairness of the accusation had rendered him speechless then. He had spent years trying to improve American tanks, trying to protect young men like Robert. His reward had been professional ostracism and personal tragedy. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Enter, he called. Captain Sullivan stepped inside, shaking rain from his coat. Sorry to disturb you so late, sir, but there's something you need to see. He handed Harrington a crumpled piece of paper. It was a half-burned message form, covered in muddy boot prints. Where did you get this? Harrington asked, studying the fragment. Sergeant Davis found it in the trash behind Prescott's quarters. He was burning documents when the storm picked up. This piece blew away before it was completely destroyed. Harrington read the partial message. Confirm Harrington proceeding with accelerated deployment. Evidence of obsession with personal vendetta. Recommend immediate recall. Mental stability questions. Blackwell expects full report. Son of a bitch, Harrington muttered. He's trying to have me removed from command. Yes, sir. Sullivan's face was grim. Blackwell's setting you up. If the Pershing deployment fails, you're the scapegoat. If it succeeds, they'll say it was despite your mental instability. Harrington felt a cold anger building. This was no longer just about tanks or doctrine. This was character assassination. Blackwell was trying to destroy his reputation permanently. Options, Captain? Sullivan straightened. We could confront Prescott directly, or report him to General Eisenhower. No, Harrington shook his head. Confronting him alerts Blackwell that we're onto his game. Reporting him just creates a distraction when we need to focus on the Pershings. Then what, sir? We proceed exactly as planned, but we give Colonel Prescott some additional responsibilities. Harrington's smile was cold. I believe he should personally oversee the maintenance facility preparations at Antwerp, effective immediately. Sullivan caught on quickly. Taking him out of our headquarters during the critical training phase. Precisely. And putting him somewhere his communications will be monitored by port security. Harrington stood, decision made. Draft the orders for my signature. He leaves at 0600 tomorrow. With pleasure, sir. Sullivan turned to leave, then hesitated. Colonel, there's one more thing you should know about Robert. Harrington tensed. What about him? The night before he died, we were talking about tank design. He mentioned your early reports on the Sherman's vulnerabilities. Said his father had predicted every problem we were facing. Sullivan met Harrington's gaze directly. He was proud of you, sir. Even when the Army wasn't listening, he was. The words hit Harrington like a physical blow. He turned away, not wanting Sullivan to see the emotion on his face. "Thank you, Captain," he said quietly. "That's good to know." When Sullivan had gone, Harrington stood at the window watching the storm lash the countryside. Robert had been proud of him. Despite the professional disgrace, despite the warnings that went unheeded, his son had understood what he was trying to do. It didn't erase the pain of loss. Nothing could do that, but somehow it made the burden a little easier to bear. Tomorrow, Prescott would be gone. The real work could begin. In less than 3 weeks, the first Pershings would arrive, and Phoenix Rises would take flight. For Robert, and for all the sons who might yet be saved. January 20th, 1945. Port of Antwerp, Belgium. Harrington stood on the rain-slicked dock, watching as the first Sherman tank rumbled down the ramp of the Liberty ship SS Michael Moran. Behind it came another and another, a procession of the same medium tanks that had been the backbone of American armored forces since 1942. But today was different. Today he was waiting for something else. "They're in the rear hold, sir," the ship's captain shouted over the noise of engines and machinery. "We loaded them last, so they'd be first off at the destination." "Thank you, Captain. Proceed when ready." The final Sherman cleared the ramp. There was a pause as the crew adjusted the angle for the heavier vehicles to follow. Then, with a grinding of tracks on steel, the first Pershing heavy tank emerged from the ship's hold. Even among the dock workers who had seen every type of military vehicle come through Antwerp, the Pershing drew stares. It was massive compared to the Sherman, 15 tons heavier, with a lower profile, sloped armor, and a gun that dwarfed anything seen on an American tank before. As it reached the bottom of the ramp, the 90-millimeter cannon traversed slightly, as if searching for targets. Sullivan stood beside Harrington, watching the tank with an expression close to reverence. "It's beautiful," he said quietly. "It's a machine, Captain. Its beauty lies in its effectiveness." But even Harrington couldn't deny the surge of emotion as the tank rolled past them onto Belgian soil. After years of fighting for better protection for American tankers, after being ignored and ostracized, after losing his son to an inadequate tank, here at last was the weapon he had championed. One by one, the Pershings emerged from the ship, 15 in all, not the 20 they had been promised. The other 5, they had learned 3 days ago, had been diverted to a testing program in England at the last minute. Another of Blackwell's maneuvers, no doubt. 15 tanks, it would have to be enough. Lieutenant Colonel Prescott appeared from the dockyard office, clipboard in hand. His assignment to Antwerp had kept him away from the main training program, but Harrington had not been able to exclude him entirely from the Pershing deployment. "All 15 vehicles accounted for, sir," Prescott reported. "Maintenance crews are standing by for initial inspections before road movement." "Very good, Colonel. Begin inspections immediately. I want these tanks moving toward the assembly area by nightfall." "Sir, port regulations require a 24-hour holding period for new equipment. The maintenance teams need time to—" "The maintenance teams have had 3 weeks to prepare, Colonel. The tanks move tonight, General Eisenhower's orders." Harrington fixed Prescott with a hard stare. "Unless you'd like to explain to the Supreme Commander why his timeline isn't convenient for you." Prescott's jaw tightened. "No, sir. We'll be ready to move by 1800 hours." "See that you are." Harrington turned back to watch the Pershings assembling in the dock area. "Captain Sullivan, you'll accompany the first 8 tanks to the 3rd Armored Assembly Area. I'll take the remaining 7 to the 9th. We rendezvous at Forward Operating Base Carter in 48 hours. "Yes, sir." Sullivan glanced at Prescott. "And Colonel Prescott?" "Colonel Prescott will remain here to coordinate the arrival of our supply echelon." Harrington didn't look at Prescott as he delivered what they both knew was effectively a demotion. His expertise is too valuable to risk in a forward area. It was a transparent excuse. Prescott knew it. Sullivan knew it. But with direct orders from Eisenhower backing the deployment, there was little Blackwell's man could do but accept the sidelining. "I'll have regular reports sent back to your position here, Colonel," Harrington added, twisting the knife slightly. "You'll be kept fully informed of our progress." "Of course, sir." Prescott's voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "I look forward to hearing of your success." "America's success, Colonel. This isn't about any individual." Harrington finally turned to face him directly. "This is about giving our men the tools they need to survive and win. Nothing more, nothing less." Prescott offered no reply beyond a curt nod. As the final Pershing rolled off the ship, Harrington felt a weight lifting from his shoulders. After months of preparation, weeks of training, and years of advocacy, the moment had finally arrived. Within days, these tanks would face German Tigers and Panthers in direct combat. The true test was about to begin. For all his confidence in the Pershing's technical capabilities, Harrington harbored no illusions about the challenges ahead. 15 tanks, however superior, could not change the strategic balance of power. But they could prove a concept. They could demonstrate that American industry and engineering could match or exceed German armor. They could save American lives. And perhaps, in some small way, they could ensure that Robert Harrington's death had meaning beyond the tragic waste of a promising young life. "It's time, Captain," Harrington said to Sullivan. "Let's introduce the Germans to American heavy armor." As if in answer, the lead Pershing's engine roared to life, its deep rumble echoing across the dockyard like distant thunder. One by one, the others followed suit, 15 mechanical beasts awakening, ready for the hunt. Phoenix Rises was taking flight at last. January 22, 1945, near Aachen, Germany. The moon cast silver light across the snow-covered field as the column of Pershing tanks moved in silent formation toward their assembly area. Colonel Thomas Harrington stood in the command hatch of the lead tank, the cold wind biting at his face as he scanned the horizon through night vision binoculars. The 7 tanks of his detachment had covered nearly 80 miles in 2 days, moving only at night to conceal their presence from German reconnaissance. So far, the Pershings had performed flawlessly. Their superior weight and power required more fuel than the Shermans, but they handled the frozen European terrain with surprising agility. The crews, hand-selected and intensively trained, had adapted quickly to their new machines despite having less than 48 hours of actual hands-on experience. "5 minutes to the rally point, sir," the driver reported through the intercom. Harrington acknowledged with a tap on the man's shoulder. Ahead, the dark outline of a forested hill marked their destination, a concealed position where they would rendezvous with elements of the 9th Armored Division. If all had gone according to plan, Captain Sullivan would be arriving at a similar position with the 3rd Armored Division 20 miles to the north. "All tanks, maintain radio silence until we reach the assembly area," Harrington ordered quietly into his throat microphone. "Keep interval at 50 yards. 7 tanks against the might of German panzer divisions." The odds were long, but Harrington found himself thinking of David versus Goliath. Sometimes quality could indeed overcome quantity if deployed with intelligence and precision. The lead Pershing crested a small rise, and Harrington saw their destination clearly for the first time. A natural depression in the landscape, ringed by dense pine trees that would conceal the tanks from aerial observation. Perfect. 15 minutes later, the 7 Pershings were positioned in a defensive semicircle within the forest clearing, their engines silent, the only sound the occasional creak of cooling metal and the soft whisper of wind through pine branches. Major Howard Bennett, Harrington's liaison with the 9th Armored, emerged from the shadows to greet him as he climbed down from his tank. "Welcome to the 9th, Colonel," Bennett said quietly, extending a gloved hand. "Glad to see you made it without incident." "Thank you, Major. Status of German armor in the sector?" Bennett led him to a camouflaged command tent where a detailed map was illuminated by a shielded lamp. "We have confirmed reports of a Tiger battalion operating 5 miles east of our position, approximately 15 tanks, supported by Panzer Grenadiers. They've been hitting our Sherman columns along this road." He traced a line on the map. 3 separate engagements in the past week. We've lost 22 tanks. They've lost none." Harrington studied the map, noting terrain features and potential engagement areas. Their pattern? They strike from concealed positions, usually at dawn or dusk. Hit hard, then withdraw before air support or artillery can respond. Bennett's expression was grim. Classic German tactics, and damn effective against our Shermans. "What about our other detachment? Any word from Captain Sullivan?" "Radio check 1 hour ago. They're in position with the 3rd Armored. No contact with enemy forces yet." Bennett hesitated. "Colonel, the men are asking questions about these new tanks. Word travels fast. The German observers will have reported their movement by now." "Good," Harrington said, surprising the Major. "I want the Germans to know something new has arrived. I want them curious and cautious." He tapped the map where the last engagement had been marked. "And I want them to come looking for us right here." Bennett's eyebrows rose. "You want to set a trap, using the Pershings as bait?" "Not bait, Major, the hammer." Harrington's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "For too long, our tankers have been forced to flee from Tigers. Tomorrow, we change that equation." As the Major absorbed this, a radio operator entered the tent. "Sir, urgent message from Captain Sullivan. Authentication code verified." Harrington took the offered handset. "Sullivan, report." Sullivan's voice crackled through static. Sir, we have a situation. Colonel Prescott arrived at our position 1 hour ago with written orders from General Blackwell. He's demanding immediate transfer of operational control of all Pershing units to his direct command. Harrington felt cold anger rising. On what authority? He claims the orders are countersigned by the War Department, sir. Says our accelerated deployment has been deemed recklessly premature and that Project Iron Shield is now under Pentagon oversight. Blackwell's move. Harrington had expected something like this, but not so quickly. Someone at Antwerp must have alerted the general the moment the Pershings rolled off the ships. Captain, does Ninth Army Command know about these orders? No, sir. Prescott brought them directly to our position. He's threatening to have us relieved of command if we don't comply immediately. Harrington made his decision instantly. Maintain your position, Captain. Do not surrender operational control under any circumstances. I'm contacting General Eisenhower directly. Yes, sir, and Colonel Prescott brought armed military police. Says they're here to ensure compliance. The implications were clear. This wasn't just bureaucratic maneuvering anymore. This was approaching armed confrontation between American officers. Understood. Hold your position. I'm on my way. Harrington handed the radio back to the operator. Major Bennett, I need your fastest transport in a security detail immediately. Sir, what's happening? Politics, Major. The deadliest terrain on any battlefield. Harrington was already moving toward the tent entrance. And I need to reach Captain Sullivan's position before anyone does something unforgivable. The journey to the 3rd Armored Position took just over an hour, with Harrington's Jeep racing through the night, accompanied by 2 armored cars for security. They encountered no German patrols, but Harrington knew that could change at any moment. They were deep in contested territory, where the front lines shifted daily. As they approached the wooded ridgeline where Sullivan's tanks were positioned, Harrington could see the silhouettes of Pershings outlined against the pre-dawn sky, and beside them the unmistakable profile of military police vehicles. Sullivan met him at the perimeter, his face tense in the dim light. Sir, the situation is deteriorating. Prescott has the MPs setting up a perimeter around our tanks. He's claiming authority to impound them pending proper evaluation procedures. Where is he now? Command tent, sir, with the 3rd Armored Liaison Officer. Harrington nodded grimly. Stay close, Captain. This ends now. The command tent was lit by portable lamps that cast harsh shadows across maps and communication equipment. Lieutenant Colonel Prescott stood at a field desk, his uniform immaculate despite the hour and conditions. Beside him stood a nervous-looking captain from the 3rd Armored and 2 military policemen. Colonel Harrington, Prescott said smoothly, showing no surprise at his arrival. I was just explaining to Captain Reynolds here the new command arrangements for Project Iron Shield. There are no new command arrangements, Colonel. Harrington's voice was ice cold. Project Iron Shield remains under my direct command by order of General Eisenhower. I'm afraid those orders have been superseded, sir. Prescott held out a folded document. Effective 0600 hours today, operational control of all T-26E3 units transfers to the Armor Evaluation Group under General Blackwell's authority. Harrington took the document but didn't open it. These orders have not been transmitted through proper theater command channels. They have not been acknowledged or approved by Supreme Allied Headquarters, and they directly contradict standing orders issued by the theater commander. The Pentagon has authority. The Pentagon is 3,000 miles away, Colonel. General Eisenhower commands in this theater. Harrington stepped closer, his voice dropping. This is a battlefield, not a testing ground. Those tanks and their crews are prepared for combat operations that commence at dawn. Your interference threatens both the mission and American lives. Prescott didn't back down. My orders are clear, Colonel. The Pershings are to be withdrawn to a secure evaluation area immediately. And if German Tigers appear in this sector tomorrow, what do you propose our Sherman crews do without heavy tank support? Die nobly for the sake of your evaluation schedule? The 3rd Armored captain shifted uncomfortably. The military policemen exchanged glances. Prescott lowered his voice. Colonel Harrington, I understand your personal investment in this project, but your judgment in this matter has been deemed compromised. The loss of your son. Harrington moved so quickly that no one had time to react. One moment he was standing calmly, the next he had Prescott pinned against the tent pole, his forearm across the younger officer's throat. You don't speak of my son, Harrington hissed. Not ever. Colonel! Sullivan stepped forward, alarmed. The MPs reached for their sidearms. Harrington released Prescott and stepped back, his self-control reasserting itself. My apologies, Colonel. That was unprofessional. Prescott straightened his uniform, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "This incident will be reported, sir. It only confirms General Blackwell's assessment of your mental state. Report what you like." Harrington turned to the radio operator. "Get me General Eisenhower's headquarters. Authentication code Sierra Echo 903. "Belay that order," Prescott snapped. "As acting commander of this unit, you command nothing here, Colonel." Harrington's voice cut like a blade. "And you never will. Captain Sullivan, place Colonel Prescott under arrest for interfering with combat operations in a forward area." "You can't do that," Prescott protested as Sullivan moved toward him. "I can, and I have. Military police. This officer is attempting to countermand battlefield deployment orders issued by Supreme Headquarters. You will escort him to the rear and hold him for military intelligence debriefing." The MPs hesitated, looking between the two colonels. "This is mutiny," Prescott sputtered. "No, Colonel. This is war." Harrington held out his hand to the communications officer who had connected with headquarters. "General Eisenhower, please. Priority Alpha. Authentication Harrington Tango Wolf 7-4. While they waited for the connection, Sullivan quietly instructed the MPs. Whatever he said seemed to convince them as they moved to flank Prescott rather than Harrington. "This isn't over, Harrington," Prescott warned as the MPs prepared to escort him out. "Blackwell won't let this stand. For once, we agree on something, Colonel." Harrington's expression was cold. "This isn't over, not by a long shot." After Prescott had been removed, Sullivan approached Harrington. "Sir, with respect, arresting a Pentagon liaison is going to have serious repercussions." "It already has, Captain, for both of us." Harrington checked his watch. "But it's bought us the time we need." The Tigers are operating less than 10 miles from here. By this afternoon, we'll either have proven the Pershing's worth in combat, or none of this will matter anyway. The radio operator signaled. "General Eisenhower's headquarters, sir. I have his chief of staff." Harrington took the handset. "This is Colonel Harrington. I need to speak with the general urgently regarding Project Iron Shield." As he outlined the situation to Eisenhower's staff, Harrington knew he was crossing a line from which there was no return. He had directly challenged the Pentagon's authority in a combat zone. If the Pershings failed their trial by fire, his career was finished. More importantly, American tankers would continue to die in inadequate machines. But if they succeeded, if the Pershing proved itself against German armor, perhaps the senseless losses would finally end. The stakes couldn't be higher. Dawn broke cold and clear over the Belgian countryside. The 8 Pershings of Sullivan's detachment were positioned along a ridgeline overlooking a critical road junction. Below, American engineers had worked through the night to create the illusion of a supply depot. Empty crates, canvas-covered shapes that resemble fuel tanks, and the controlled movement of a few supply trucks. Bait for the Tiger. Intelligence reports indicated that German armored reconnaissance had been active in the area overnight. They would have observed the apparent establishment of a supply point, and if past patterns held, the Tiger Battalion would strike within hours, seeking to destroy what they believed was a vulnerable target. Harrington stood with Sullivan at the edge of the forest, studying the terrain through binoculars. The morning mist was beginning to burn off, revealing fields of snow broken by hedgerows and the occasional farmhouse. "Perfect killing ground," Sullivan observed quietly. 800 yards of open terrain before they reach the supply depot. Our gunners will have clear shots. Assuming they come, Harrington lowered his binoculars, and assuming our gun sights are properly calibrated for these conditions. The Pershing's 90mm gun was theoretically capable of penetrating a Tiger's frontal armor at ranges up to 1,000 yards. But theory and battlefield reality were often very different things. Weather conditions, crew experience, and the chaos of combat could all affect a weapon's actual performance. "The crews are ready, sir," Sullivan assured him. "They've been drilling constantly since we arrived. Every man understands what's at stake." Harrington nodded, feeling the weight of command. These were his tanks, his men, his doctrine being tested today. If he had miscalculated, American lives would be lost. But inaction carried its own, greater cost. The continued loss of Sherman crews across the European theater. "Status of our air support?" he asked. "P-47's on standby at St. Trond Airfield, 20-minute response time if needed. And 9th Armored? 2 companies of Sherman's positioned as our secondary line, 3 miles back. They'll move up once the engagement begins, but remain beyond Tiger firing range unless needed." Harrington checked his watch. 0730 hours. The waiting was always the hardest part. "Return to your command tank, Captain. I'll monitor from position 3. Remember, let them close to 600 yards before opening fire. We need to demonstrate conclusively that the Pershing can penetrate Tiger armor at combat ranges. Sullivan saluted. Yes, sir, good hunting. As the captain departed, Harrington took a final look at the valley below. Somewhere out there, German tankers were making their own preparations. Young men not so different from Robert, serving a cause he considered evil, but doing so with skill and courage nonetheless. War created strange symmetries between enemies. He pushed the thought away. Today was about saving American lives, not philosophical musings on the nature of conflict. Today was about proving what he had argued for years, that American tanks needed to match their German counterparts in quality, not just quantity. The radio at his hip crackled. Lookout reports vehicle movement, grid reference Tango 57, multiple tracked vehicles approaching from the east. Harrington raised his binoculars again, scanning the distant tree line. There, the unmistakable profile of German armor emerging from the forest. One, then another, then a third. Tigers, moving in a standard attack formation, confident in their dominance of the battlefield. Why wouldn't they be? For years, they had ruled the European battlefields, destroying Shermans almost at will, rarely facing a weapon that could threaten their thick armor. That was about to change. Harrington keyed his radio. All Pershing units, enemy armor confirmed. Maintain concealment. Wait for my command to engage. The Tigers advanced methodically across the open ground, 5 of them in a wedge formation with infantry support following at a distance. They were still over 1,000 yards away, moving at a deliberate pace, their commanders clearly visible, standing in the turret hatches scanning for threats. Their confidence was palpable and understandable given their experiences against American armor thus far. Harrington moved quickly to his assigned position, climbing into the commander's hatch of Pershing No. 3. Below him in the turret, the gunner and loader waited in tense silence. Target status? Harrington asked through the intercom. 5 Tigers, sir. Lead vehicle at 900 yards and closing, the gunner reported. Gun laid on lead tank. Hold fire. Let them come closer. The minutes stretched as the German tanks continued their advance. 800 yards. 750. 700. The Tigers showed no sign of suspecting the trap. Their infantry support had fallen further behind, no longer visible from Harrington's position. 650 yards. All Pershing units, Harrington said into his radio, voice calm. Fire on my command. Gunners select individual targets. Aim center mass. The Tiger formation had reached the outer edge of the false supply depot, their commanders still exposed in the hatches, believing themselves beyond the effective range of any threat. 600 yards. Fire. 8 90mm guns roared in unison, the sound rolling across the valley like thunder. Through his binoculars, Harrington watched as the lead Tiger jerked violently, its right track shattered by a direct hit. Almost simultaneously, another Tiger's turret erupted in a geyser of flame as an armor-piercing round penetrated its side armor and ignited the ammunition inside. The remaining 3 Tigers reacted instantly, turrets traversing to face the new threat, commanders dropping into the protection of their vehicles. But they were caught in the open, without cover, against an enemy they couldn't yet see clearly. Another Pershing round struck the disabled lead Tiger, this time penetrating the frontal armor and detonating inside the fighting compartment. A moment later, the ammunition cooked off, blowing the massive turret completely off the hull. Reload and fire at will, Harrington ordered. Focus on the operational tanks. The Pershings launched a second coordinated volley. One round struck a Tiger's gun mantlet, ricocheting upward without penetrating. Another hit the ground short of its target, sending up a geyser of dirt and snow. But 2 found their marks, one penetrating a Tiger's side armor, the other striking the vulnerable engine compartment of the 3rd tank. The German tanks were returning fire now, their 88mm guns targeting the muzzle flashes of the Pershings. Shells whistled overhead or exploded in the tree line, but the American tanks' hull-down positions provided excellent protection. All units, adjust fire. 2 rounds per target, then relocate, Harrington instructed. Standard doctrine to prevent counter-battery fire from zeroing in on their positions. For 5 intense minutes, the uneven battle continued. The 3 surviving Tigers maneuvered desperately, seeking cover that didn't exist, their powerful guns hammering the American positions, but failing to find targets in the concealed forest edge. Then it was over. The 5th Tiger, attempting to retreat across open ground, took a direct hit from 3 Pershings simultaneously. Its fuel tanks ignited, engulfing the massive vehicle in flames. The crew attempted to escape through the hatches, but only 2 made it clear before secondary explosions consumed the tank completely. "Cease fire," Harrington ordered. "All units report status." The reports came in quickly. All 8 Pershings operational. 0 casualties. 5 Tigers destroyed. The entire engagement had lasted less than 10 minutes. Sullivan's voice came over the command channel, barely containing his excitement. "Sir, confirm 5 enemy tanks destroyed. No penetrations of our armor despite multiple hits. The 90mm gun performed exactly as specified." Harrington surveyed the battlefield. 5 smoking hulks that had once been the most feared tanks in Europe. German infantry retreating in disarray, and not a single American casualty. "Well done, Captain. Maintain positions and prepare for potential counterattack. I want full ammunition resupply within the hour." As the adrenaline of battle began to subside, Harrington felt a complex mix of emotions. Professional satisfaction at seeing his theories validated, pride in the performance of the crews under his command, and a deep, aching sadness that this capability had come too late for Robert and countless other American tankers who had faced Tigers in inadequate Shermans. "Sir," the radio operator called, "priority message from 9th Armored Command. General Bradley is requesting immediate briefing on the engagement." Of course he was. Word would spread quickly. American tanks had engaged and destroyed a Tiger company without losses. The implications for the ongoing campaign were enormous. "Acknowledge receipt. Tell them I'll report in person after we've secured the area." Harrington turned to his driver. "Take me to the battlefield. I need to examine those Tigers personally." The evidence would be irrefutable now. Not theories or projections, but the burned-out hulks of German tanks destroyed by American guns. Even Blackwell couldn't argue with such concrete proof. As his vehicle moved down the slope toward the smoldering remains of the Tiger formation, Harrington allowed himself a moment of vindication. Years of fighting the system, of being branded a traitor for telling uncomfortable truths, had finally led to this moment. The Pershing had proven itself in combat. Now the real battle would begin, ensuring that this success translated into policy change and accelerated production. American tankers deserved nothing less. The news of the Pershing's success spread through the Allied command structure with astonishing speed. By mid-afternoon, Harrington found himself summoned to 1st Army headquarters, where General Bradley was meeting with his corps commanders. 5 Tigers confirmed destroyed, General," Harrington reported, standing before a tactical map where the morning's engagement had been marked. "No American losses. The Pershing's 90mm gun penetrated Tiger armor at ranges from 600 to 800 yards. Our own armor withstood multiple hits from German 88mm rounds." Bradley, known for his reserved demeanor, allowed himself a small smile. "Impressive results, Colonel. General Eisenhower will be pleased." He gestured to a signals officer. "Show Colonel Harrington the message we received an hour ago." The officer handed Harrington a decoded transmission. It was from General Marshall in Washington. "Pentagon Review Committee disbanded. Stop. Pershing deployment approved at highest level. Stop. Production accelerated effective immediately. Stop. Congratulations on successful combat debut. Stop." Harrington read it twice, absorbing the implications. The bureaucratic obstacles had been swept away. The success of a single engagement had accomplished what years of reports and testing could not. "There's more," Bradley said, nodding to his aide. "A personal message from General Eisenhower regarding Lieutenant Colonel Prescott." The second message was briefer. "Prescott returning Washington immediately. Stop. Charges drop per my authority. Stop. Iron Shield continues under Harrington. Full stop." "It seems you've won on all fronts, Colonel," Bradley observed, studying Harrington's reaction carefully. "Not me, sir. American tankers won today." Harrington handed the messages back to the aide. "And with respect, the battle isn't over. 20 Pershings, 15 now in theater, won't change the strategic situation. We need hundreds, and quickly." "I agree, and so does Schaeff." Bradley turned to the map. "Your Pershings are being consolidated under 3rd Armored for the next phase of operations. Captain Sullivan will command the company. We need them at the spearhead of our advance toward the Rhine." "Sullivan is an excellent choice, sir." Harrington hesitated. "In my role?" "You're being recalled to Washington immediately, Colonel." Bradley held up a hand as Harrington began to protest. "Not as punishment. Quite the opposite. General Marshall wants you to personally oversee the accelerated Pershing production program. No one knows the tank's capabilities and requirements better than you." "Washington." Away from the front lines just as the Pershing was proving itself in combat. Away from the men he'd trained. It felt like both a promotion and an exile. There's another aspect to consider, Colonel, Bradley added, seeming to sense his reluctance. General Blackwell will be fighting this decision through every channel available to him. His reputation and influence are at stake. Someone needs to be in Washington to counter his efforts. Harrington understood the logic. The battle was shifting from the muddy fields of Europe to the carpeted corridors of the Pentagon, and in that arena, his experience with both the technical aspects of tank design and the bureaucratic infighting of weapons development would be invaluable. When do I leave, sir? Transport to Paris tomorrow, then military flight to Washington. You'll be briefing the War Department Tank Production Committee on Monday morning. Less than a week to prepare his case, to compile the evidence, to formulate production recommendations. It would be challenging, but nothing compared to the years he'd already spent advocating for better tanks. I'll be ready, General. I know you will, Harrington. Bradley's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I've reviewed your 1942 report. You were right. If we'd had Pershing 6 months ago, we might have been across the Rhine by now. The validation from a commander of Bradley's stature was meaningful, but it couldn't erase the losses that might have been prevented. Robert would still be dead. Thousands of other American tankers would still be dead. No official acknowledgement could change that hard truth. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. As he left the headquarters building, Harrington paused to look eastward, toward Germany. Somewhere out there, American tanks were still engaging German armor, still fighting with disadvantageous odds. The Pershings would help change that equation, but there were still too few of them to make a strategic difference. His new battle would be fought with production schedules and resource allocations rather than armor-piercing rounds. Less dramatic, perhaps, but potentially more consequential for the remaining course of the war. He just hoped he could win it in time to save more lives. Harrington found Sullivan at the maintenance area where the Pershings were being serviced after their first combat action. The young captain was supervising the reloading of ammunition, moving from tank to tank, checking each vehicle personally. They performed better than we expected, sir, Sullivan reported, wiping grease from his hands as Harrington approached. Accuracy at range, penetration power, armor protection, all exceeded specifications. The crews are ecstatic. As they should be. They made history today, Captain. Harrington surveyed the line of tanks with pride. Despite showing the dust and mud of combat, they looked formidable, purposeful. American tanks that could finally stand toe-to-toe with the best German armor. I've been recalled to Washington. You'll be taking command of the Consolidated Pershing Company under 3rd Armored. Sullivan's expression registered surprise, then understanding. They need you to fight the production battle. Exactly. General Blackwell won't surrender easily, despite today's success. Harrington placed a hand on the younger officer's shoulder. The Pershings will be at the spearhead of the advance toward the Rhine. I'm counting on you to prove their worth beyond any possibility of doubt. We will, sir. Sullivan hesitated. Before you go, there's something you should see. He led Harrington to a maintenance tent where a group of technicians were examining components removed from one of the Pershings. We found this during post-action inspection. He pointed to a hydraulic line from the turret rotation mechanism. It had been partially cut, with a clean incision that was clearly deliberate. Sabotage? Harrington asked, though the answer was obvious. Yes, sir. On 3 of our tanks. If they'd seen heavier combat, the lines would have ruptured under pressure. The turrets would have jammed, leaving them vulnerable. Prescott, Sullivan nodded grimly. Had to be. He had access during the loadout at Antwerp. We've checked all tanks and replaced the compromised components. The implications were staggering. Not just bureaucratic obstruction, but deliberate sabotage that could have cost American lives in combat. The act went beyond professional disagreement or even career preservation. It was treasonous. Document everything, Harrington ordered. Photographs, technical analysis, chain of custody. I want irrefutable evidence. Already done, sir, but what about Prescott? He's being sent home with nothing more than a slap on the wrist. Harrington considered the options. Direct accusation would lead to a protracted investigation, potentially delaying the Pershing deployment while the matter was resolved. And Blackwell would use his considerable influence to protect his subordinate. We focus on the mission, Captain, getting more Pershings into production and into combat. Once that's secured, we can address Prescott's actions through proper channels. Sullivan clearly wasn't satisfied with this answer, but he nodded. Yes, sir. Keep this information secure. Share it only with General Marshal's office through encrypted channels. Harrington examined the sabotage component again, feeling cold anger at the calculated risk to American lives. This isn't over, Captain, but we fight one battle at a time. As they walked back toward the tank line, Sullivan asked quietly, "Do you think Blackwell knew about the sabotage, I mean?" "I don't know." Harrington watched as crews continued their maintenance work on the Pershings, preparing them for the next day's operations. Plausible deniability is a powerful shield for senior officers. He may have given Prescott broad instructions to ensure the Pershing doesn't outperform expectations and left the details unspoken. They stopped beside the lead tank, which the crew had named Avenger in white paint on the gun barrel. Appropriate, Harrington thought. "I leave for Paris tomorrow morning," he told Sullivan. "The Pershing Company is yours. Use them wisely, aggressively, but not recklessly. We need results, but we also need these tanks operational for the Rhine crossing." "Understood, sir." Sullivan straightened to attention and saluted. "It's been an honor serving with you, Colonel." Harrington returned the salute. "The honor has been mine, Captain. Your performance has been exemplary." He paused, then added more quietly, "Robert would have been proud to serve under your command." Sullivan's expression softened. "He was a good man, sir. The best of us. What we did today was for him, and all the others we lost in those damn Shermans." Harrington nodded, not trusting himself to speak further on the subject. "Carry on, Captain. I'll expect regular reports on the Pershing's performance." "Yes, sir, and good hunting in Washington. Those battles can be more dangerous than anything we face out here." "Different weapons, same objective," Harrington replied. "Victory at the lowest possible cost in American lives." As he walked away from the tank line, Harrington felt a familiar mixture of pride and loss that had become his constant companion. Pride in what had been accomplished today. Loss for all those who hadn't lived to see it. The Pershing had proven itself in combat. Now it was his responsibility to ensure that this success translated into policy change and accelerated production. For Robert, for all of them. The military transport plane bucked and shuddered in the turbulent February air as it approached Washington National Airport. Harrington, strapped into his seat near the bulkhead, reviewed his notes one final time before landing. The 4-day journey from the front lines had given him ample time to prepare his presentation for the War Department, but he still felt the pressure of the task ahead. In his briefcase were the combat reports from the Pershing's first engagements, along with photographs, technical analyses, and the preliminary recommendations for production acceleration. Also included in a separate sealed envelope was the evidence of Prescott's sabotage, to be shared only with General Marshall personally. The plane touched down with a jolt, its tires screeching on the wet runway. Outside the small window, Harrington could see the familiar skyline of Washington, D.C., gray and indistinct through winter rain. It had been nearly 2 years since he'd last been in the capital, before Robert's deployment, before his own return to active duty. A staff car was waiting on the tarmac, a young lieutenant standing beside it with an umbrella. "Colonel Harrington, Lieutenant Adams, sir. General Marshall's office sent me to escort you to the Pentagon." "The Pentagon? I wasn't scheduled to report until tomorrow morning." "Yes, sir. There's been a change of plans. The general wants to see you immediately." That could be either very good or very bad news. Harrington stowed his briefcase and climbed into the staff car, mentally preparing for either possibility. The Pentagon was as imposing as ever, a massive concrete structure that had been completed less than 2 years earlier. As they passed through security checkpoints, Harrington noted the increased measures since his last visit. The war might be progressing well in Europe, but Washington was taking no chances with security. Lieutenant Adams led him through the labyrinthine corridors to a section of offices belonging to the Army Chief of Staff. After brief scrutiny by a security officer, Harrington was ushered into a conference room where General George C. Marshall sat at the head of a table, surrounded by staff officers and civilians whom Harrington didn't recognize. "Colonel Harrington, welcome back to Washington." Marshall rose to shake his hand. "Thank you for coming directly from the airport. I apologize for the change in schedule, but circumstances demanded it." "No apology necessary, sir. I serve at your convenience." Marshall gestured to the others at the table. "You know General Thompson from Ordnance. The others are Mr. Davis from War Production, Colonel Wesley from Strategic Planning, and Mr. Harrison from the President's Scientific Advisory Committee." Harrington acknowledged each with a nod, noting the absence of anyone from General Blackwell's office. Significant, perhaps. "Please be seated, Colonel." Marshall returned to his chair, We've reviewed the preliminary reports of the Pershing's combat debut. Impressive results. 5 Tigers destroyed without American casualties. Multiple penetrations at combat ranges. Yes, sir. The Pershing performed beyond expectations in every category. The 90mm gun proved capable of penetrating Tiger armor consistently at ranges from 600 to 800 yards. Our own armor withstood direct hits from German 88mm rounds with minimal damage. Mr. Davis from War Production leaned forward. In maintenance requirements, reliability under combat conditions, all 15 tanks remained operational throughout the engagement in subsequent operations. Minor mechanical issues were resolved through standard field maintenance. The powertrain and suspension systems handled the additional weight without difficulty. General Thompson nodded approvingly. Consistent with our testing data from Aberdeen, the Pershing is a solid design. Marshall turned to a folder in front of him. Colonel Harrington, I've reviewed your original 1942 report on Sherman vulnerabilities, as well as your subsequent recommendations for heavy tank development. Your analyses were prescient and thorough. The question now is how quickly we can transition from Sherman to Pershing production. This was unexpected. Harrington had prepared to fight for accelerated production, not to be asked directly how to implement it. He seized the opportunity. Sir, with appropriate prioritization, we could convert approximately 30% of Sherman production lines to Pershing within 60 days. Full conversion would require 4 to 6 months due to retooling requirements and component supply chains. And the impact on total tank output? Davis asked. Initial reduction of perhaps 15% in total units, but each Pershing replaces multiple Shermans in combat effectiveness. The exchange rate is more than favorable from both military and production perspectives. Colonel Wesley frowned. General Blackwell's staff has submitted a different assessment. They project a 30% reduction in total armored fighting vehicles if we shift to Pershing production. Their analysis suggests this would create critical shortages by summer. And there it was. Blackwell was still fighting the battle, even after the Pershing's combat success. With respect, Colonel, that analysis assumes we maintain current loss rates in Sherman tanks, Harrington countered. The fundamental advantage of the Pershing is that it survives engagements that destroy Shermans. Our actual tank strength in theater would increase within 90 days despite lower production numbers. Marshall studied him thoughtfully. You seem very certain of these projections, Colonel. I am, sir. I've been calculating these figures for 3 years, adjusting for actual combat loss data. Harrington met the general's gaze directly. Every Sherman sent to Europe now is likely to be destroyed before reaching the German border. That's not an efficient use of American industrial capacity. A silence fell over the room as the implications of this stark assessment were absorbed. Where is General Blackwell? Harrington finally asked. I would have expected him to be present for this discussion. Marshall and Thompson exchanged glances. General Blackwell is currently on administrative leave pending an investigation, Marshall said carefully. Lieutenant Colonel Prescott made certain allegations upon his return that required immediate attention. Prescott had clearly attempted to get ahead of potential sabotage accusations by making counterclaims. A standard defensive maneuver, but potentially effective if handled skillfully. What sort of allegations, sir? Harrington asked, keeping his expression neutral. He claims you deliberately engineered a limited engagement scenario to make the Pershing appear more effective than it actually is. That you selected optimal conditions that don't reflect typical combat situations. I see. Harrington considered his response carefully. The engagement occurred when and where German forces chose to attack, sir. We positioned our tanks advantageously, as any competent commander would. But the Tigers initiated the action according to their own tactical doctrine. I'm inclined to agree, Colonel, Marshall said, particularly since we've received reports of 2 additional Pershing engagements since your departure, with similar results. 8 more German tanks destroyed, including 3 Panthers, with only 1 Pershing damaged. This was news to Harrington. Sullivan had wasted no time demonstrating the Pershing's capabilities in combat. General, I have information regarding Lieutenant Colonel Prescott that bears on this matter. Harrington opened his briefcase and removed the sealed envelope containing the sabotage evidence. This should be reviewed in a more restricted setting. Marshall accepted the envelope without opening it. I'll examine this privately, Colonel. For now, let's focus on the production question. He turned to the others. Gentlemen, the President has asked for our recommendation by tomorrow morning. The combat data is clear. The Pershing is superior to the Sherman in every meaningful metric. The only remaining question is how quickly we can transition production. Mr. Davis from War Production straightened in his chair. Based on Colonel Harrington's assessment and our own analysis, I believe we can implement a phased conversion plan beginning March 1st. 30% of production shifted to Pershing immediately, increasing to 70% by June, with full conversions by September. That seems reasonable, Marshall agreed. Colonel Harrington, would you be willing to oversee this transition program? You would have direct authority over technical requirements and production standards, reporting to General Thompson and myself. It was everything Harrington had fought for. Direct authority to implement the changes he had advocated for years. A position to ensure that American tanks were no longer death traps for their crews. I would be honored, sir, but I would request permission to make periodic visits to the European theater to assess the Pershing's performance firsthand and incorporate combat lessons into production improvements. Granted, Marshall said without hesitation. In fact, I insist upon it. This program is too important to lose touch with battlefield realities. He closed the folder in front of him. Gentlemen, I believe we have our recommendation for the President. Colonel Harrington will provide a detailed implementation plan by Friday. We'll reconvene then to finalize the approach. As the meeting adjourned, Marshall asked Harrington to remain behind. When they were alone, the general opened the sealed envelope and quickly reviewed its contents, his expression darkening. Deliberate sabotage of combat vehicles, he said quietly. If proven, this would be a court-martial offense, possibly treason. The evidence is conclusive, sir. 3 Pershings were found with identical damage to critical hydraulic lines. The cuts were made with precision, designed to cause catastrophic failure under combat conditions. Marshall set the documents aside. And you believe Colonel Prescott was acting under orders from General Blackwell? I have no direct evidence of that, sir, but Prescott had both opportunity and motive as Blackwell's representative. This complicates matters. Marshall stood and walked to the window, looking out at the rain lashing against the glass. Blackwell has powerful allies in Congress and among defense contractors. A public accusation of sabotage would create a political firestorm at a time when we need unity of purpose. With respect, sir, American lives were deliberately put at risk. That can't go unanswered. And it won't, Colonel. Marshall turned back to face him. But we must secure the Pershing production program first. That's the priority. Once that's irreversibly in motion, we can address Prescott's actions through appropriate channels. It was the same calculus Harrington had made in the field. Mission first, accountability second. He didn't like it any better now than he had then, but he understood the necessity. Yes, sir. Get some rest, Colonel. You have quarters at Fort Myer tonight. Tomorrow we begin planning the largest tank production transition since the Sherman itself was introduced. Marshall offered his hand. You fought a long battle to reach this point, Harrington. Your persistence may have saved thousands of American lives. As he left the Pentagon that evening, Harrington thought about those words. Lives saved in the future couldn't bring back those already lost, couldn't bring back Robert. But perhaps they gave meaning to his sacrifice and to Harrington's own years of struggling against institutional resistance. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets wet and reflective under the streetlights. In Europe, American tanks were advancing toward the Rhine, including a company of Pershings that could finally face German armor on equal terms. In Washington, the machinery of government was shifting to ensure that more such tanks would join them in the coming months. It wasn't justice, it wasn't redemption, but it was progress. And for now, that would have to be enough. The following day brought a flurry of activity as Harrington was installed in a temporary office at the Pentagon and began assembling his team for the Pershing production program. General Thompson assigned him a staff of engineers, production specialists, and logistics experts, all with direct experience in tank manufacturing. By mid-afternoon, they had drafted the initial framework for a phased conversion plan. It was complex but achievable. 30% of Sherman production would transition to Pershing by April 1st, with additional conversions occurring as retooling was completed at various factories. The goal was to have the first new production Pershing shipping to Europe by May, with numbers accelerating through the summer. As they worked, Harrington received a telegram from Captain Sullivan. Pershing company engaged Panzer Division near Cologne, stop. 12 enemy tanks destroyed, stop. 1 Pershing lost to mechanical failure. Not enemy fire, stop. Advancing to Rhine as ordered, stop. German resistance stiffening, stop. Need more Pershings, soonest, stop. The message confirmed what Harrington already knew. The Pershing was changing the equation on the battlefield. American tankers finally had a vehicle that could engage German armor on equal terms. But 15 tanks weren't enough to make a strategic difference. They needed hundreds, and quickly. At 1800 hours, as his team was finalizing the first draft of the production plan, Harrington received a call from General Marshall's office requesting his immediate presence. He arrived to find the general alone, reviewing documents at his desk. "Come in, Colonel. Please close the door." Marshall waited until Harrington was seated before continuing. "I've completed my review of the evidence against Lieutenant Colonel Prescott. It's compelling and disturbing. Technical analysis confirms the damage was deliberate, not accidental." "Yes, sir. There can be no doubt of intentional sabotage." "I've also received a preliminary report from counterintelligence regarding Prescott's communications while in Europe." Marshall's expression was grim. He maintained regular contact with General Blackwell through unofficial channels, bypassing theater command structures. The content of those communications is still being analyzed, but the pattern is suspicious at best. "And Blackwell, sir?" "That's where matters become complicated." Marshall leaned back in his chair. "General Blackwell has powerful political connections, including several key members of the Senate Military Affairs Committee. A direct accusation against him would trigger investigations that could delay or derail the Pershing program at a critical juncture." Harrington felt a surge of frustration. "So he escapes accountability for potentially treasonous actions?" "I didn't say that, Colonel." Marshall's voice was measured but firm. "Blackwell has been permanently removed from any role in armor development or procurement. He's being reassigned to an administrative position that appears prestigious but carries no actual authority. His career, for all practical purposes, is over." "And Prescott?" "Military justice will take its course, but quietly. He'll face a court-martial on charges of sabotage and dereliction of duty. The proceedings will be classified to avoid public controversy during wartime." It wasn't the public reckoning Harrington had hoped for, but it was more than he had expected. Blackwell neutralized, Prescott facing military justice, and most importantly, the Pershing program moving forward without their interference. "I understand your desire for more visible accountability, Colonel," Marshall said, reading Harrington's expression. "But our priority must be winning this war with minimal additional loss of American lives. The Pershing program is now officially the Army's highest production priority, second only to aircraft. That's the victory that matters most." "Yes, sir, I agree." Harrington straightened in his chair. "My team has completed the preliminary production transition plan. We believe we can have new production Pershings arriving in Europe by May, with full conversion of all tank manufacturing by September." "Excellent. I'll expect your detailed report tomorrow for the President's review." Marshall paused. "There's one more matter we need to discuss, Colonel. A personal one." Harrington tensed, uncertain what to expect. "I've reviewed your son's service record," Marshall continued. "Lieutenant Robert Harrington's actions at St. Lo deserved recognition beyond the standard Silver Star awarded posthumously. Based on new witness testimonies, including Captain Sullivan's, I've recommended that his award be upgraded to the Distinguished Service Cross." For a moment, Harrington couldn't speak. The Distinguished Service Cross was the nation's second highest military honor, just below the Medal of Honor itself. It was an extraordinary recognition of Robert's sacrifice. "Thank you, sir," he finally managed. That would have meant a great deal to him. "It's well-deserved, Colonel. Your son's actions saved 4 men that day." Marshall reached into his desk and removed a small box. "The formal ceremony will be scheduled later, but I thought you might want to have this now." He opened the box to reveal the Distinguished Service Cross, its blue ribbon and bronze cross gleaming in the office light. The citation notes Lieutenant Harrington's extraordinary heroism and selfless sacrifice in returning to a disabled tank to rescue wounded comrades while under direct enemy fire, Marshall said quietly. "Actions that reflect the highest traditions of the United States Army and bring great credit upon himself, his unit, and the armed forces of the United States." Harrington accepted the box with hands that weren't quite steady. It was a bittersweet moment, recognition of Robert's courage, but also a stark reminder of his loss. No medal could bring him back. No honor could fill the void his death had left. "One more thing, Colonel. I took the liberty of contacting your wife about the awards ceremony. She's agreed to attend." Eleanor, Harrington hadn't spoken to her since leaving for Europe months ago. Their last conversation had been painful, filled with recriminations and grief. That she would agree to attend the ceremony was unexpected. When? He asked. Next Wednesday at the Pentagon, a small private ceremony, just family and a few official representatives. Marshall studied him carefully. I hope that meets with your approval. Yes, sir. Thank you for arranging it. As Harrington left the general's office, he felt a strange mixture of emotions. Professional vindication with the Pershing program moving forward at last. A measure of justice with Blackwell neutralized and Prescott facing court-martial. And now this unexpected recognition of Robert's sacrifice, bringing with it the possibility of reconnection with Eleanor. None of it erased the past, none of it brought back the lives lost in inadequate tanks. But perhaps it offered a path forward, a way to honor those sacrifices by ensuring they wouldn't be repeated. For the first time in a very long time, Harrington allowed himself to feel something like hope. February 21st, 1945, Pentagon, Washington, D.C. The small ceremony room was quiet as Harrington waited, standing at attention in his dress uniform, ribbons and decorations aligned precisely on his chest. The Distinguished Service Cross ceremony for Robert would begin in 15 minutes. A handful of officials had already arrived. General Marshall, 2 members of the awards board, a chaplain. But it was Eleanor he was watching for. They hadn't seen each other in nearly 6 months, not since their bitter parting before his deployment to Europe. She appeared in the doorway precisely 5 minutes before the scheduled start, elegant in a navy blue dress with a small hat and veil that partially obscured her face. At 50, Eleanor Harrington remained a striking woman, her posture straight, her movements graceful despite the visible grief that had aged her since Robert's death. Their eyes met across the room, and after a moment's hesitation, she walked toward him. Thomas, she said quietly, you look well. As do you, Eleanor. Thank you for coming. I'm here for Robert. Her voice was composed but cool. He deserves this recognition. Yes, he does. Harrington wanted to say more to bridge the vast gulf between them, but this wasn't the time or place. The ceremony won't be long, just a citation reading and presentation. She nodded, then asked unexpectedly, I heard about the new tanks, the ones you've been advocating for all these years. They're finally being used? Yes, the Pershing. It's proven highly effective against German armor. Eleanor's eyes, so like Robert's, held his for a long moment. Would it have saved him if he'd had one of those instead of a Sherman? It was the question that had haunted Harrington for months. Possibly. Probably. The Pershing can withstand hits that destroy Shermans instantly. She absorbed this, her expression unreadable behind the partial veil. Then it wasn't all for nothing, your fight with the Army, the reports they ignored. No, it wasn't for nothing. Harrington hesitated, then added, Robert knew that. Captain Sullivan told me our son was proud of my work, even when the Army wasn't listening. A flicker of something, pain or perhaps a shadow of comfort, crossed Eleanor's face. He always believed in you. Even when She stopped, composing herself. This isn't the time. General Marshall approached them, saving Harrington from having to respond. Mrs. Harrington, thank you for joining us today. If you're ready, we can begin the ceremony. The formal proceedings were brief but dignified. The citation was read, detailing Robert's extraordinary heroism in returning to a burning tank to save wounded comrades. The Distinguished Service Cross was presented to Eleanor, as was traditional for posthumous awards. Throughout, she maintained her composure, accepting the honor with quiet dignity. When the official ceremony concluded, the small gathering moved to an adjacent room where refreshments had been arranged. Eleanor stood slightly apart, the metal case held carefully in her gloved hands. Harrington approached her cautiously. Would you like to sit down? Perhaps some tea? What I'd like, she said quietly, is to understand what happens now. With these new tanks, will they make a difference for other mothers' sons? Yes. Harrington's response was immediate and certain. Production is being converted from Shermans to Pershings. By summer, most American tank units in Europe will be equipped with them. They can face German tanks on equal terms. Eleanor nodded slowly. Good. She looked down at the metal case, then back up at him. I was angry with you for so long, Thomas, for encouraging Robert to join the armor branch, for your obsession with tanks that seemed to come before everything else, even your family. Eleanor, please let me finish. She took a deep breath. I blamed you when we got the telegram. Blamed you for not stopping him from going to Europe, for not making the Army listen about the Sherman's problems. It was easier than accepting that sometimes there's no one to blame. That war simply takes our children and doesn't care about our grief. Harrington stood silent, allowing her the space to say what she needed to. General Marshall told me what you have accomplished, how your work will save thousands of lives. Her voice softened. Robert would be so proud, Thomas. He always was, even at the end. I miss him every day, Harrington said simply. As do I. Eleanor's composure cracked slightly. We lost him. I couldn't bear to lose you too, even though I pushed you away. Pride is a terrible thing sometimes. It was the closest she had come to reconciliation in the 8 months since Robert's death. When this is over, Harrington said carefully, when the war is won, perhaps we could try again. Not to recapture that's gone, but to build something new from what remains. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. Perhaps we could, when it's over. She glanced around the room, then back to him. You'll return to Europe soon? Yes, I need to assess the Pershings in combat, incorporate any necessary improvements into production. Be careful, Thomas. I've lost enough to this war already. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely, but it was an acknowledgement that he still mattered to her, that despite everything, there might be a path forward for them. I will, he promised, and I'll write this time, if you'd like to hear from me. I would. She allowed herself a small smile. Tell me about these tanks of yours. Tell me how they're making a difference. As they sat together in a quiet corner of the reception, Harrington began to explain the Pershing program in terms Eleanor would understand, not the technical specifications or production schedules, but what it meant for the young men in those tanks, the increased chance of survival, the ability to fight back against an enemy that had held the advantage for too long. She listened attentively, asking occasional questions, her initial reserve gradually warming. They were a long way from healing all the wounds between them. Years of emotional distance followed by the devastating loss of their only child had created chasms not easily bridged. But it was a beginning, a small flame of connection rekindled amid the ashes of grief. Like the Phoenix Project itself, rising from destruction towards something new. When they parted an hour later, Eleanor surprised him by taking his hand briefly. Finish your work, Thomas. Make Robert's sacrifice matter. Then come home, and we'll see what can be salvaged from all this loss. I will, he promised. As he watched her walk away, Harrington felt a shifting within himself, a rebalancing of grief and purpose, loss and determination. The battle for the Pershing was largely won. American tankers would soon have the protection they deserved. But his personal journey, it seemed, was not yet complete. There was still work to do, in Europe and at home. Still wounds to heal and promises to keep, for Robert, for Eleanor, for himself. March 7, 1945, Remagen, Germany. Captain Michael Sullivan crouched behind the stone wall at the eastern approach to the Ludendorff Bridge, his binoculars trained on the opposite bank of the Rhine. Around him, soldiers from the 9th Armored Division moved with purpose, securing the unexpected prize they had captured just hours earlier, the last intact bridge across the Rhine River. The Germans had tried to demolish it as American forces approached, but failed. Now American infantry had established a tenuous foothold on the east bank, the first Allied crossing of the Rhine, and Sullivan's Pershings were about to join them. Captain, battalion commander wants you at the command post, a young lieutenant reported, sliding into position beside him. Sullivan nodded and handed over the binoculars. Keep an eye on that tree line. Germans are bringing up everything they've got to push us back across. At the makeshift command post in a damaged building near the western bridgehead, Colonel John Leonard of the 9th Armored pored over hastily drawn maps. Sullivan, there you are. Leonard looked up, his face showing the strain of 36 hours without sleep. Situation's deteriorating on the east bank. German armor reported moving toward the bridgehead. We need to get tanks across to support our infantry. My Pershings are ready, sir. 5 operational units fueled and armed. Leonard hesitated. Engineering says the bridge structure is compromised. They're concerned about weight limits. What are they allowing across? Light vehicles only. They want to reinforce the structure before attempting to move Shermans across, let alone your heavies. Sullivan felt a surge of frustration. The Pershing's primary advantage, its armor and firepower, came at the cost of additional weight. Nearly 20 tons heavier than a Sherman, each Pershing could stress the damaged bridge beyond its limits. How long for the reinforcement? 12 hours minimum, maybe 24. Leonard pointed to the eastern bank. But we might not have 12 hours. Reports indicate panzer units converging. If they push our infantry back before we establish armor support, he left the implications unspoken. Sullivan studied the map, weighing options. A Sherman might cross safely, but would be outmatched by German heavy tanks. A Pershing could handle whatever the Germans brought, but might collapse the bridge in the attempt. Sir, request permission to move one Pershing across immediately. I'll take personal command. If the bridge holds, we follow with the others. If there's any sign of structural failure, we abort. Leonard considered this. That's a hell of a risk, Captain. Bigger risk is letting the Germans retake that bridgehead, sir. The Pershing can hold that position against anything they throw at us while engineers strengthen the bridge. After a moment, Leonard nodded. Approved, but Sullivan, first sign of the trouble, you back that tank off the bridge, understood? We can't lose our only crossing. Understood, sir. As Sullivan left to prepare his crew, he thought of Colonel Harrington. This was exactly the moment the older officer had envisioned. American heavy armor taking the fight directly to the Germans on their home soil. After months of preparation, weeks of combat testing, and years of development, the Pershing would lead the first armored thrust across the Rhine. If the bridge held, 30 minutes later, Sullivan stood beside the massive form of his command tank, now named Avenger, studying the bridge through binoculars. Engineers had cleared the debris and makeshift barriers from the western approach, creating a narrow path for vehicles. On the far side, American infantry had established defensive positions covering the eastern end, but German artillery was already beginning to target the area. Sullivan gathered his crew, driver, gunner, loader, and assistant driver, for a final briefing. Bridge is damaged but intact. Engineers believe it will support our weight if we maintain minimum speed and center line. Once across, we take position at the road junction beyond the eastern end. Infantry reports German armor moving in that direction. Private James Morris, the 20-year-old driver, looked nervous. What if it doesn't hold, sir? Sullivan met his gaze directly. Then we get very wet, soldier. But this bridge is held for trains weighing 3 times what we do. We'll make it. He didn't mention that those trains hadn't crossed a structure damaged by demolition attempts. Some details were best left unspoken. Mount up. We move in 5 minutes. Inside the tank, Sullivan took his position in the commander's cupola. The metal hatch opened to give him maximum visibility. Through his intercom, he addressed the crew. Slow and steady across. No sudden movements or corrections. Gunner, keep the turret centered. No rotation during crossing. Driver 5 miles per hour, dead center on the roadway. Acknowledgements came through the headphones as each crew member confirmed their instructions. Sullivan switched to the battalion frequency. Command, Avenger. Moving on to bridge now. Avenger command. Acknowledged. Good luck, Captain. The massive Pershing rumbled forward, its engine growling as it approached the bridge approach. Around them, infantry and engineers stopped their work to watch. No one had attempted to move such a heavy vehicle across the damaged structure yet. As they reached the bridge itself, Sullivan felt the vibration change beneath them. The tank's 50-ton weight pressed down on steel and stone that had never been meant to withstand direct bombing attempts. Through his binoculars, he could see gaps in the roadway ahead, where entire sections had been damaged, hastily patched by American engineers. Steady, Morris, right down the middle. The tank crept forward at walking pace, each foot of progress a testament to American engineering and the young driver's steady nerves. Halfway across, a loud metallic groan echoed through the structure, causing Sullivan to grip his hatch rim tighter. Keep moving. Don't stop. Below them, the dark waters of the Rhine flowed swiftly. If the bridge collapsed, the tank would sink like a stone, trapping the crew inside. Sullivan had ordered the hatches left unsecured for exactly this reason. A desperate escape might be their only chance if the worst happened. Another groan, louder this time, accompanied by a visible shifting of the roadway beneath them. Sullivan held his breath, watching as a shower of concrete dust fell from the structure into the river below. 300 feet to the east bank, he reported calmly. Maintain speed. The final approach seemed to take forever, each second stretching as the damaged bridge protested beneath their weight. Then, with a lurch that nearly threw Sullivan against the cupola rim, they reached solid ground on the eastern bank of the Rhine. Avenger has crossed, Sullivan reported into his radio. Bridge is holding, but showing significant stress. Recommend maximum interval for following vehicles. Even as he spoke, Sullivan could see German artillery impacts on the ridge ahead. The enemy was responding to the American bridgehead with everything they had. In the distance, the unmistakable rumble of tank engines could be heard. Gunner, load armor piercing. Driver, position at the road junction. Hold down behind that stone wall. We're about to have company. The Pershing moved into position, its massive gun trained on the approaching ridgeline. Sullivan switched frequencies to contact the infantry commander on the east bank. "This is Pershing Command. We're in position at the junction. What's your situation?" "Captain, thank God," came the relieved response. "German armor approaching from the northeast. At least 3 tanks, possibly Tigers. We've got nothing that can stop them." "We do now," Sullivan replied grimly. "Hold your positions. The Pershing can handle Tigers." As if on cue, a German tank appeared on the ridge, 800 yards ahead, its distinctive angular profile unmistakable, even at that distance. A Tiger, just as reported. It paused, clearly surprised to find American armor already established on the east bank. "Target identified. Tiger, 800 yards, Ridge Road." "Target acquired," the gunner responded, the electric turret motors humming as he fine-tuned his aim. "Fire when ready." The Pershing's 90mm gun roared, the shell streaking toward the distant German tank. Through his binoculars, Sullivan watched as it struck just below the Tiger's turret ring, penetrating the armor. A moment later, flames erupted from the German tank as ammunition inside ignited. "Target destroyed. Traverse right. Second Tiger approaching through the tree line." The Pershing's turret swung smoothly, its gun acquiring the new target as it emerged from cover. Again, the 90mm gun fired, and again a German tank was left burning. "Command, Avenger. 2 Tigers destroyed at the eastern bridgehead. Bridge is holding. Request immediate reinforcement with remaining Pershing units." Within the hour, 3 more Pershings had carefully crossed the bridge, establishing an armored defense of the Remagen bridgehead that the Germans could not overcome. By nightfall, infantry and engineers had expanded the foothold, and work was underway to strengthen the bridge for a full armored crossing. The Rhine had been breached, the pathway into Germany's heartland was open, and the Pershing tanks had led the way. As darkness fell, Sullivan composed a brief message to be transmitted to Washington. "Colonel Harrington, Pentagon. Armor Command, Washington, D.C. Pershing's first American tanks across Rhine, stop. 7 German tanks destroyed in bridgehead defense, stop. Bridge secure, stop. Advancing as ordered, stop. Send more Pershing, stop." Sullivan. 2 days later, in his Pentagon office, Colonel Thomas Harrington read Sullivan's message with a mixture of pride and professional satisfaction. The Remagen crossing was headline news across America. The first Allied bridgehead across the Rhine, captured intact against all expectations. And Pershings had been first across, proving their worth in the most critical moment of the campaign. He set the telegram aside and returned to the production charts spread across his desk. The Pershing program was moving forward rapidly now, with 3 major manufacturing facilities already converting from Sherman to Pershing production. By May, the first new production tanks would be shipping to Europe. By July, Pershing would replace Sherman as the primary American battle tank. Too late for thousands who had died in inadequate tanks, but in time to save thousands more as the Allied armies pushed deeper into Germany. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Enter," he called. General Thompson, head of Army Ordnance, stepped into the office. "Congratulations, Colonel. I just came from the War Department. Your Pershings made quite an impression at Remagen." "Thank you, sir. The credit belongs to Captain Sullivan and his crews. They executed perfectly." "Perhaps, but they wouldn't have had those tanks without your persistence." Thompson set a folder on the desk. "The President has reviewed our production acceleration plan. Full approval, highest priority. You've got everything you asked for." Harrington opened the folder, scanning the authorization documents. It was indeed everything he had requested: maximum production allocation, priority on materials, expedited shipping to the European theater. "This will make a significant difference, sir." "It already has." Thompson took a seat across from him. "The Remagen crossing may have shortened the war by months, and the casualty projections with Pershing versus Sherman for the remaining campaign are dramatically improved. Lives saved. That had been Harrington's goal from the beginning, long before Robert's death had made it personal. American tankers deserving the same quality equipment that their German counterparts had. "There's one more thing, Colonel." Thompson's tone shifted slightly. "The court-martial proceedings against Lieutenant Colonel Prescott have concluded." Harrington looked up sharply. "The verdict? Guilty on all counts. Sabotage of military equipment, conduct unbecoming an officer, and insubordination." Thompson's expression was grim. "He's been sentenced to 20 years at Leavenworth." "And Blackwell?" "Officially retired as of yesterday. No charges were filed, but his reputation is finished. Too many people know what happened now." It was justice of a sort, though Harrington took little satisfaction from it. No punishment could bring back the men who had died in Sherman's when better tanks might have saved them. No sentence could restore Robert to life. Colonel, General Marshall asked me to inform you that your request has been approved. You'll be returning to Europe next week to assess Pershing performance firsthand. Your production team will continue implementation here under my direct supervision. Thank you, sir. I'd like to see the tanks in action myself. There may be improvements we can incorporate into the production models based on combat experience. Always the engineer, Thompson observed with a slight smile. That's why this program has succeeded where others failed. Your attention to both the technical details and the human factor. He stood to leave. Your transport leaves Monday. 3 weeks in theater, then back to oversee final production adjustments. After Thompson had gone, Harrington sat quietly, contemplating the developments. The Pershing was proving itself in combat. Production was ramping up. The men who had sabotaged the program had faced consequences. By any measure, his mission was succeeding. And yet, there remained an emptiness that no professional victory could fill. Robert was still gone. Eleanor was still distant, despite their tentative reconciliation at the medal ceremony. And somewhere in Europe, young men were still dying in tanks. Fewer, perhaps, better protected, certainly, but dying nonetheless. War's costs could be mitigated, but never eliminated. Harrington gathered the production documents into his briefcase. He would work late tonight, ensuring everything was in order before his departure for Europe. There was still much to do, and the soldiers at the front deserved his best effort. Just as Robert had, March 15, 1945, 8 miles east of Remagen, Germany, Sullivan's Pershing Company moved in a broad formation across the rolling German countryside. 5 tanks spread across a half-mile front with infantry support following closely. Since crossing the Rhine at Remagen 8 days earlier, they had advanced steadily eastward, encountering sporadic but determined German resistance. The war was clearly approaching its final phase. German forces were withdrawing toward their final defensive positions, but still fighting with the desperate courage of men defending their homeland. Civilian refugees clogged the roads, fleeing westward from the advancing Soviet armies in the east. Sullivan stood in his commander's hatch, scanning the terrain ahead through binoculars. The morning fog was lifting, revealing a landscape of small farms and woodland copses. Perfect ambush country. All units, maintain interval. Gunners alert for anti-tank positions in those woods at 2 o'clock. The acknowledgments came through his headphones as the tank formation continued its advance. In the 2 months since the Pershings had entered combat, they had established a fearsome reputation. German armor now avoided direct engagement when possible, relying instead on mines, hidden anti-tank guns, and occasional hit-and-run attacks by fast-moving Panther tanks. Still, the statistical results were undeniable. The Pershing Company had destroyed 27 German tanks while losing only 3 of their own, 2 to mechanical failures, and 1 to a concealed anti-tank gun at close range. They had proven everything Colonel Harrington had claimed about the tank's capabilities. "Movement, left flank, tree line," reported his gunner through the intercom. Sullivan swung his binoculars toward the indicated position. There, the unmistakable profile of a German tank emerging from the forest edge, its long-barreled 88mm gun already traversing toward the American formation. "King Tiger, left flank, 1,000 yards, Sullivan called, dropping down into the turret and securing his hatch. "Gunner, target that tank, AP round." The King Tiger, officially the Tiger II, was the most formidable German tank of the war. Even heavier than the original Tiger, with thicker sloped armor and the devastating long-barreled 88mm gun, it was a worthy adversary even for the Pershing. "Target acquired," the gunner reported, the electric motors humming as the turret rotated. "Fire when ready." The 90mm gun roared, sending its armor-piercing round downrange. Through his periscope, Sullivan watched as it struck the King Tiger's frontal armor and ricocheted off, the German tank's sloped plates deflecting the round harmlessly skyward. No penetration. Reload and fire again. Aim for the lower hull. Even as his crew prepared a second shot, the King Tiger fired. Its 88mm shell screamed over the Pershing's turret, missing by feet. The German gunner was adjusting his aim, finding the range. "Driver, move forward, 50 yards, then hard right. Don't give them a stationary target." The Pershing lurched forward, its powerful engine responding instantly to the driver's commands. Across the formation, the other American tanks were also maneuvering, spreading out to engage the threat. "Second King Tiger spotted," called the radio operator, emerging from same tree line 800 yards. 2 King Tigers. The Germans were committing their heaviest armor to stop the American advance, A deadly challenge, but also an opportunity to demonstrate the Pershing's capabilities against the best German tanks. Sullivan's gunner fired again, the 90mm shell striking the first King Tiger at the junction of its hull and turret. This time there was visible damage, though the German tank remained operational, its own gun firing again and striking the ground just yards from Sullivan's tank. All Pershings converge on targets. Tank 2 and 3 engage the second Tiger, 4 and 5 with me on the first. The American formation shifted smoothly, tanks moving to establish firing positions while maintaining enough motion to prevent accurate German return fire. It was a dance of steel giants, each seeking the critical advantage that would allow a killing shot. Sullivan's gunner fired a third time, the round striking the first King Tiger's right track and disabling it. The German tank was now immobile, but its turret continued to track the 88mm gun, searching for targets. "Circle right. Get behind him while he's immobile," Sullivan ordered his driver. The Pershing accelerated, using a small rise for cover as it moved to flank the damaged German tank. The other American tanks maintained fire, keeping the King Tiger's attention divided. As they circled to the German tank's vulnerable rear, Sullivan spotted movement in his turret. The commander's hatch opened, and a figure began to emerge, the German tanker attempting to escape his disabled vehicle. For a brief moment, Sullivan considered ordering his gunner to hold fire. The man was trying to surrender, perhaps, or at least save himself from a burning tank. But war allowed little room for such hesitations. The King Tiger's gun was still active, still a threat to American lives. "Gunner, target the rear hull. Fire!" The 90mm gun fired one final time, its round penetrating the thinner rear armor of the King Tiger and detonating inside. A moment later, the German tank erupted in flames as its ammunition cooked off, the turret lifting slightly from the hull with the force of the internal explosion. Sullivan turned his attention to the second engagement, where the remaining Pershings were circling the other King Tiger like wolves around a wounded bear. As he watched, a coordinated volley struck the German tank simultaneously from 3 directions. It ground to a halt, smoke pouring from its engine compartment. "Cease fire," Sullivan ordered. "Let's see if they surrender." This time the German crew made their choice clear. White flags appeared from the turret hatches as the tank commander and crew emerged with hands raised. "Infantry, secure those prisoners," Sullivan directed through the battalion net. "All Pershing units, report status." The responses came quickly. All 5 tanks operational. Minor damage to 2 from near misses, but nothing affecting combat capability. Another engagement completed successfully, with 2 of Germany's most formidable tanks destroyed or captured at the cost of some expended ammunition. As the infantry moved forward to secure the area and collect the German prisoners, Sullivan allowed himself a moment of reflection. Colonel Harrington had been right all along. Given equal or superior equipment, American tankers could match or exceed the vaunted German panzer forces. The Pershing had proven that beyond any doubt. His radio crackled with a new transmission. "Pershing Company, this is Eagle 6. Do you read?" Sullivan recognized the call sign of the division commander. "Eagle 6, this is Pershing Actual, reading you 5x5. Pershing Actual, be advised, VIP inbound to your position, ETA 20 minutes. Secure your perimeter and prepare for inspection." A visiting VIP this close to the front lines? Unusual, but not unheard of. Probably some general or war correspondent wanting to see the famous new tanks in action. "Acknowledged, Eagle 6, we'll be ready." Sullivan directed his tank to a hull-down position overlooking the recent battlefield, where the smoking remains of the first King Tiger and the intact but captured second provided dramatic evidence of the engagement. The other Pershings formed a protective perimeter as infantry established security positions. Precisely 18 minutes later, a small convoy of jeeps approached from the west. As they drew closer, Sullivan recognized the lead vehicle's passenger, Colonel Thomas Harrington, now wearing the Eagle insignia of a full colonel. Sullivan ordered his tank to a halt and climbed down from the commander's hatch. His uniform stained with the grime of combat. He saluted as Harrington approached. "Colonel, welcome to the front." "Captain Sullivan." Harrington returned the salute, then extended his hand. "I hear you've been putting these tanks through their paces." "Yes, sir. They've performed beyond expectations." Sullivan gestured toward the battlefield. "As you can see." Harrington surveyed the scene, his expression a mixture of professional satisfaction and something deeper, more personal. The King Tiger's massive form, now a smoking ruin, represented everything the Pershing had been designed to counter. 2 King Tigers in one engagement. Impressive. The credit belongs to the tanks, sir, and the crews. Sullivan led Harrington toward his command vehicle. The 90mm gun has proven effective against all German armor we've encountered, though the King Tiger's frontal armor can deflect rounds if the angle is poor. We've adapted our tactics accordingly. Any mechanical issues I should be aware of? The production teams are implementing final modifications now. They spent the next hour discussing technical details, track tension issues in muddy terrain, turret rotation speeds in cold conditions, ammunition storage improvements. Sullivan's crews demonstrated maintenance procedures while Harrington took notes, occasionally asking questions or suggesting modifications. Finally, they stood alone beside the captured King Tiger, examining its massive 88mm gun and thick armor plating. The ultimate expression of German tank design, Harrington observed. Powerful, heavily armored, mechanically precise, but too complex for mass production, too heavy for many bridges, too fuel-hungry for Germany's strained supply lines. And now, finally outmatched, Sullivan added. The Pershing gives us parity or advantage in every category that matters. Harrington nodded, running his hand along the German tank's scarred armor plate. How are the men holding up? Morale is excellent. Tank crews always perform better when they have confidence in their equipment. With the Pershing, they know they can face anything the Germans send against them. And you, Captain? How are you holding up? The question caught Sullivan off guard. It wasn't the typical inquiry from a superior officer, especially one as formally correct as Harrington had always been. I'm fine, sir, focused on the mission. Harrington studied him for a moment. You've been in continuous combat for nearly 2 months, Sullivan. That takes a toll, no matter how good the equipment or how successful the outcomes. Sullivan shrugged slightly. It's what we trained for, sir. What all of this was about. He gestured toward the Pershings, getting the right tools to do the job properly. Yes, but remember that the men using those tools matter too. Harrington's expression softened slightly. Including you. Robert always spoke highly of your leadership, said you put your men first, sometimes at your own expense. The mention of Lieutenant Harrington brought back memories Sullivan had kept carefully contained. The burning Sherman, the desperate rescue attempt, the final fatal German shell. Your son was one of the finest officers I've served with, sir. What happened at St. Lo? He paused, searching for words. None of us had a chance in those Shermans, but he tried anyway. Saved 4 men before going back for the 5th. I know. Harrington looked toward the horizon where the sounds of distant artillery marked the continuing advance. That's why this matters so much, Sullivan. Not just the tanks, but what they represent. A country that values its soldiers enough to give them the best possible equipment. A military that learns from its mistakes instead of repeating them. We're making a difference, sir, every day, every engagement. Yes, you are. Harrington turned back to him. I'm here for 3 weeks, evaluating the Pershing in combat operations. I'd like to observe your company in action if possible. See firsthand how the tanks perform under real conditions. Of course, sir. We're advancing again tomorrow at 600. Intelligence reports German armor attempting to establish a blocking position 10 miles east. I'll be there. Harrington checked his watch. For now, I need to return to division headquarters. Continue your excellent work, Captain. The production teams in the States are working around the clock to send you more Pershings. As Harrington prepared to leave, Sullivan felt compelled to ask one more question. Sir, what happens after? When the war ends? Does the Pershing program continue, or do we go back to the old ways? It was the question that had haunted many who had witnessed the Sherman's inadequacies firsthand. Would the hard lessons be remembered or forgotten once peace returned? That's why I'm here, Sullivan. Not just to assess current performance, but to document everything for future tank development. The next American tank will build on the Pershing's successes and address its limitations. We won't go backward. The answer was reassuring. Harrington understood that the Pershing wasn't just about winning this war, but about establishing a new standard for American armor design that would protect future generations of tankers. Good hunting tomorrow, Captain. I'll see you at the jump-off point. Sullivan saluted as the colonel returned to his jeep. The upcoming action would be another opportunity to demonstrate the Pershing's capabilities. This time with the program's creator watching firsthand. It felt right somehow. Full circle. The man who had fought for years to give American tankers a fighting chance would finally see the fruits of his efforts in combat. Sullivan was determined to show him exactly how much difference those efforts had made. The dawn attack unfolded exactly as planned. Sullivan's Pershing Company led the armored thrust, supported by infantry and artillery, as they advanced toward the reported German blocking position. Colonel Harrington observed from a command vehicle positioned on a ridge overlooking the battlefield, close enough to see clearly but outside the direct line of fire. The German defense consisted of a mixed force of Panthers, anti-tank guns, and infantry positioned along a natural ridgeline. Their fire was accurate and determined, but ultimately ineffective against the advancing Pershings. The American tanks maneuvered with practiced precision, using terrain for cover while their 90mm guns systematically eliminated German strongpoints. By mid-morning, the position had been secured, 3 Panther tanks destroyed, numerous anti-tank guns silenced, and dozens of German infantry captured. The Pershing Company had suffered only minor damage to 1 tank from an artillery near miss. As Sullivan directed the consolidation of their gains, he spotted Harrington's vehicle approaching the newly captured position. The colonel had evidently decided that observing from a distance wasn't sufficient. "Impressive work," Harrington said as he joined Sullivan beside the command tank. "Your company functions like a veteran unit that's been together for years, not months." "Thank you, sir. The men have adapted quickly to the Pershing's capabilities. It allows tactics that simply weren't possible with the Sherman." They walked the battlefield together, examining the destroyed German equipment and discussing the engagement's details. Harrington took photographs of the Panther tank's penetration points, documenting exactly how the Pershing's 90mm rounds had defeated the German armor. "These will be valuable for the production teams," he explained, confirming real-world performance against the technical specifications. As they completed their survey, a radio operator approached at a run. "Captain Sullivan, Colonel Harrington, urgent message from Division Command." Sullivan accepted the field telephone. "Sullivan here." The division operations officer's voice crackled through the handset. "Captain, we've got reports of a major German armored formation approaching your sector from the northeast. Reconnaissance estimates at least 15 tanks, including Tiger and King Tiger models, supported by mechanized infantry. ETA your position approximately 90 minutes. Understood. Current strength 5 operational Pershings, full ammunition load. Request artillery support and air cover if available." "Artillery is being coordinated now. Air support unlikely due to weather conditions developing east of your position. Division is sending Sherman units to reinforce, but they're at least 2 hours out." "We'll hold, sir." "One more thing, Captain. Intelligence believes this is a special armored group led by Colonel Otto Kretschmer. He's one of their most decorated panzer commanders, pulled from the Eastern Front specifically to counter our armored advance. This is likely a deliberate attempt to engage your Pershing Company directly." Sullivan exchanged glances with Harrington. The Germans were committing significant resources to eliminate the Pershing threat, a backhanded compliment to the tank's effectiveness. "Acknowledged. We'll prepare accordingly. Sullivan out." He handed the phone back to the radio operator and turned to Harrington. "Sir, I recommend you return to division headquarters immediately. This position is about to become very hot." "I'm staying, Captain." Harrington's tone left no room for argument. "This is precisely what I came to observe, the Pershing against the best German armor in a direct engagement." Sullivan knew better than to waste time arguing. "Then I suggest you remain in the command bunker we've established in that farmhouse. It offers good protection and visibility." "Agreed. Now, let's prepare for our visitors." The next hour was a flurry of activity as the Pershing Company established defensive positions along the ridgeline. Each tank was placed in a hull-down position, with only its turret exposed above natural cover. Infantry dug in around them, creating an integrated defense. Artillery coordinates were calculated and registered for likely German approach routes. Sullivan joined Harrington in the command bunker, a reinforced farm cellar with a clear view of the valley approach. Through binoculars, they could see the first dust clouds rising in the distance, the approaching German armor. "They're coming straight at us," Sullivan observed. "No attempt at concealment or flanking maneuvers." "Kretschmer's reputation is for direct assault," Harrington replied. "Overwhelming force applied at the point of maximum effect. It served him well on the Eastern Front against Soviet armor. Different situation here. His Tigers may be powerful, but we can match them shot for shot." As they watched, the German formation came into view. It was impressive and intimidating, a full company of heavy tanks advancing in textbook formation, their long-barreled 88mm guns like accusing fingers pointing toward the American position. Sullivan keyed his radio. "All Pershing units, hold fire until targets reach 1,000 yards. Gunners select targets from right to left, priority to King Tigers." The tense wait as his German armor approached reminded Sullivan of their first engagement months earlier. But this was different. a deliberate, set-piece battle between the best tanks both sides could field, a final test of the Pershing's capabilities against the cream of German armor. 900 yards, reported the forward observer, German infantry deploying on their flanks. Artillery, fire mission as planned, Sullivan ordered. Pershing units, prepare to engage. The American artillery opened fire first, 105mm shells raining down on the exposed German infantry and forcing them to seek cover. The German tanks continued their advance, seemingly undeterred by the barrage. 800 yards, Germans are spreading out, adopting attack formation. All Pershings, you are cleared to engage. Fire at will. 5 90mm guns fired almost simultaneously, their reports echoing across the valley. Through his binoculars, Sullivan watched as the rounds struck the German tanks. 2 found vulnerable points, disabling a Panther and damaging a Tiger's track. The others deflected or failed to penetrate at the extreme range. The Germans returned fire immediately, their 88mm guns targeting the American positions with practiced precision. 1 round struck just feet from a Pershing's turret, showering it with dirt and debris but causing no significant damage. Close range, maximum effect, Sullivan murmured, recognizing Kretschmer's tactics. He wants to get inside 600 yards where the 88 is most effective. Can you stop him before he gets there? Harrington asked. We're about to find out. The battle escalated rapidly as both sides exchanged fire. The Pershing's rate of fire was slightly faster, but the German gunners were exceptionally accurate. A Tiger's shell struck one Pershing directly on its turret front, the impact visible even from the command bunker. But the American tank's armor held, the round deflecting upward without penetrating. Pershing 3 hit but operational, came the report. Returning fire now. Another exchange of fire. Another German tank disabled, its turret jammed by a direct hit. But the remaining German forces pressed forward relentlessly, closing the distance to the American positions. 600 yards in closing, reported the observer. They're making a push for the center of our line. Sullivan recognized the critical moment approaching. If the German tanks breached their defensive line, the advantage would shift decisively. The Pershings were excellent in defense, but would be vulnerable if forced to maneuver against superior numbers. All units, concentrate fire on the lead King Tiger. Maximum rate armor-piercing rounds. 3 Pershings shifted their fire to the massive German tank leading the central thrust. Their 90mm rounds struck in rapid succession, each impacting the frontal armor at slightly different points. The cumulative effect was devastating. The 3rd round penetrated, triggering a catastrophic internal explosion that blew the turret completely off the hull. But even as the King Tiger fell, the remaining German tanks surged forward, closing to deadly close range. An 88mm round struck a Pershing's flank, penetrating the side armor and disabling the vehicle. Its crew bailed out seconds before internal fires reached the ammunition storage. Pershing 2 is down, Sullivan reported grimly, crew escaping. The battle hung in the balance, 4 American tanks against 11 German heavies, with the distance closing and intensity increasing by the second. Artillery continued to hammer the German infantry, preventing them from supporting their tanks effectively, but the armored threat remained critical. Captain, they're attempting to flank our right, Harrington pointed out, spotting a movement Sullivan had missed. Pershing 5, traverse right, enemy armor attempting to flank. The rightmost American tank responded immediately, its turret swinging to engage the threat. Its 90mm gun caught a Panther as it emerged from cover, the shell striking the junction of hull and turret and penetrating cleanly. The German tank slewed to a halt, smoke pouring from its hatches. For 20 intense minutes, the battle raged across the ridgeline. Both sides took losses. Another Pershing disabled by a direct hit to its engine compartment, but 4 more German tanks destroyed by coordinated American fire. The balance began to shift as the superior protection of the Pershings allowed them to withstand hits that would have destroyed Sherman's instantly. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the German assault faltered. The remaining tanks began to withdraw, using smoke grenades to cover their retreat. Through the swirling smoke, Sullivan could see them pulling back to covered positions beyond effective range. They're breaking off, Harrington observed. Kretschmer must have decided the position is too costly to take. Sullivan ordered his remaining tanks to hold fire, conserving ammunition in case the Germans attempted another assault. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that the primary attack was over. German infantry could be seen withdrawing as well, falling back to secondary positions. The final tally was remarkable. 8 German tanks destroyed or disabled, including 2 King Tigers and 3 Panthers. The Pershing Company had lost 2 tanks to combat damage, with 3 remaining operational. Most importantly, all American crews had survived, even those whose tanks had been hit. As the smoke cleared, Sullivan received a radio call from division headquarters. "Captain, be advised. Aerial reconnaissance reports German armor withdrawing from your sector. Reinforcements ETA your position 30 minutes. Acknowledged. Will hold pending your arrival." He turned to Harrington, who was studying the battlefield through binoculars. "Your thoughts, sir?" Harrington lowered the binoculars slowly. The Pershing performed exactly as designed. It met the best German armor on equal terms and prevailed through superior tactics and crew training. He paused. But more importantly, it protected its crews. Even the tanks that were hit gave their men a chance to survive. That ultimately was what mattered most. Not the tactical victory or the technical validation, but the lives saved. American tankers who would return home after the war instead of being buried in foreign soil. "That was always your goal, wasn't it, sir?" Sullivan asked quietly. "Not just winning battles, but saving lives." Yes. Harrington's gaze remained on the battlefield, where recovery teams were already moving to secure the damaged Pershings. After Robert died, after so many died in inadequate tanks, that became the only goal that mattered. They stood in silence for a moment, both contemplating the cost of the lessons learned and the lives that might have been saved if those lessons had been heeded earlier. "The war's almost over," Sullivan finally said. "Germany can't sustain these losses much longer." "No, they can't, but we need to ensure the lessons aren't forgotten when peace comes." Harrington turned to face him directly. "That's the next battle, Sullivan. Making sure the next generation of American tanks builds on what we've learned here. Making sure no future American tankers face the disadvantages you and Robert did." It was a worthy mission, Sullivan thought. A fitting tribute to those who had fought and died in inadequate machines, and to the man who had fought so long to correct that injustice. "If anyone can win that battle, sir, it's you." Harrington nodded, his expression resolute. "We both will, Captain. The fight doesn't end when the war does. It just moves to different terrain." April 18, 1945. Pentagon, Washington, D.C. Colonel Thomas Harrington stood at the podium in the Pentagon briefing room, facing an audience of generals, production officials, and congressional representatives. Behind him, a screen displayed photographs and technical diagrams from his recent European assessment tour. "In conclusion, gentlemen, the M26 Pershing has exceeded all performance expectations in combat conditions. In over 60 direct engagements with German heavy armor, Pershing units have achieved a kill ratio of approximately 3.5 to 1. More significantly, crew survival rates in tanks hit by enemy fire exceed 90%, compared to less than 40% in comparable Sherman engagements." He advanced to the final slide, a photograph of Sullivan's Pershing Company posed proudly with their tanks after the decisive battle against Kretschmer's Panzer Group. The men who crew these tanks have nothing but praise for their performance, protection, and firepower. Their only complaint is that we didn't have enough of them, soon enough. Harrington paused, meeting the eyes of key decision-makers in the audience. "That's a mistake we must not repeat." General Marshall, seated in the front row, nodded slightly. Beside him, the Secretary of War made notes on a leather-bound portfolio. "My formal report recommends that Pershing production continue at maximum capacity through 1945, with development of an improved version incorporating combat lessons for 1946 introduction. The fundamental design is sound, but specific improvements to transmission reliability, ammunition storage, and fire control systems will enhance performance further." As Harrington concluded his presentation, the room erupted in questions. He fielded them methodically, providing technical details, production timelines, and combat assessments with precision born of intimate knowledge. This was the environment he had navigated for years, the intersection of military requirements, industrial capabilities, and political realities. But unlike those earlier years, he now spoke with the authority of proven success. The Pershing was no longer a paper concept or controversial proposal. It was a battle-tested weapon that had saved American lives and helped break German defenses. Its value was beyond debate. After the formal briefing concluded, General Marshall approached him privately. "Excellent presentation, Colonel. The production authorization is secure through fiscal year 1946 at minimum. Your improvements will be incorporated into the next production block." "Thank you, sir. That's good news." There's more. Marshall handed him a sealed envelope. These are your new orders, effective immediately upon your acceptance. Harrington opened the envelope, scanning the contents quickly. He looked up in surprise. Brigadier General, Director of Armored Vehicle Development, a new position created specifically for you. Marshall smiled slightly. The President and I agree that American tank development shouldn't depend on the persistence of a single determined officer fighting the system. We need institutional knowledge and continuity. You'll build the organization from the ground up, reporting directly to the Secretary of War. It was an extraordinary opportunity and validation of everything Harrington had fought for over the years. Not just the Pershing itself, but the principle that American armored forces deserve the best possible equipment, developed through a process that valued combat effectiveness and crew protection above all else. I accept, sir, gladly. I thought you might. Marshall extended his hand. Congratulations, General Harrington. Your first task will be completing the Pershing combat assessment and initiating development of its successor. I believe you already have some ideas in that regard. Several, sir. Captain Sullivan and his crews provided excellent feedback on potential improvements. Good. We'll have the formal promotion ceremony next week. I've taken the liberty of inviting your wife. She seemed pleased when I spoke with her. Eleanor, in their recent communications, a warmth had begun to return that Harrington had feared lost forever. Their shared grief over Robert remained, but no longer stood as an impassable barrier between them. The Distinguished Service Cross ceremony had been a turning point, opening a path toward reconciliation. Thank you, sir. That was thoughtful. As he left the Pentagon that evening, Harrington paused to look at the Virginia sky, painted in spectacular oranges and purples by the setting sun. The war in Europe was nearing its end. Germany's final collapse was weeks, perhaps days away. In the Pacific, the fight would continue longer, but its outcome was no longer in doubt. And when it was over, when the soldiers and tankers came home, he would ensure that the hard lessons learned would not be forgotten, that Robert's sacrifice and that of thousands of others would lead to lasting change. The Pershing was just the beginning, the first step in a new approach to American armor development that would protect future generations of tankers. Its legacy would be measured not in battles won or enemies defeated, but in American lives saved. Sons who would return to their families, fathers who would see their children grow. For Thomas Harrington, no victory could be more meaningful than that. Epilogue, May 8, 1965, West Point Military Academy. The spring sunlight gleamed on the polished steel of the M26 Pershing tank, positioned prominently in the Academy's armor exhibit. 20 years after the end of World War II, it stood as a monument to American engineering and the evolution of armored warfare. Beside it, newer models showed the progression of tank design, the M46 Patton, the M48, and the current M60, each building on the lessons learned from its predecessors. Brigadier General Thomas Harrington, retired, stood before the Pershing, his reflection visible in its still perfect surface. At 72, he remained straight-backed and distinguished, though his hair had long since turned white and lines of experience marked his face. As the Academy's guest lecturer on armor development, he had spent the morning sharing insights from his long career with eager cadets. Now, in a moment of quiet reflection before departing, he studied the vehicle that had changed so prime for the Army, for the nation, and for him personally. "Quite something, isn't she?" came a familiar voice behind him. Harrington turned to see Michael Sullivan, now a full colonel and commander of the armor school at Fort Knox. They had maintained their connection over the decades, their shared experiences in Europe forming a bond that transcended typical military relationships. "Still impressive after all these years," Harrington agreed, resting his hand on the tank's side. "Hard to believe it's been 20 years. 20 years of progress built on its foundation." Sullivan joined him beside the Pershing. "The cadets were captivated by your lecture, especially the first-hand account of the Remagen crossing. They're good kids, sharp questions about the future of armor in the nuclear age. And your answers? That fundamentals remain constant even as technology evolves. Protection, firepower, mobility." Harrington smiled slightly, and never forgetting that it's the men inside who matter most. Sullivan nodded, understanding the deeper meaning behind those words. It had been Harrington's consistent message throughout his influential career. The purpose of better tanks was not simply military superiority, but the protection of American lives. "Eleanor couldn't join you this trip?" Sullivan asked after a moment. "Doctor's orders. The flight would be too taxing with her heart condition." Harrington's expression softened at the mention of his wife. After nearly losing her to their shared grief following Robert's death, their reconciliation and subsequent years together had been a precious second chance. She sends her regards, says you and Catherine must visit when you're next in Pennsylvania. We'd like that. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, both contemplating the journey that had brought them to this point. From the desperate days of early 1945, when American Sherman tanks faced German Tigers at devastating disadvantage, to the present day, when American armor stood as the finest in the world. A group of cadets approached, stopping respectfully at a distance when they noticed the two senior officers in conversation. "I think your admirers want another word before you leave, sir," Sullivan observed with a smile. "Not admirers, Colonel, simply the next generation of officers who will continue what we started." Harrington straightened his shoulders. "Our legacy isn't in metal and machinery, Sullivan. It's in the institutional knowledge we built, the understanding that American soldiers deserve the best protection we can provide them." "A worthy legacy, sir." Harrington nodded to the waiting cadets, indicating he would join them momentarily. Before leaving, he placed his hand once more on the Pershing's armored flank. "For Robert," he said quietly, "and all the others. They would be proud, sir." Sullivan's voice was equally soft. "Of the tank, of what it represented, and most of all of what you accomplished after." As they walked together toward the eager young cadets, future leaders who would face their own challenges and make their own decisions about how to protect American lives in conflict, Harrington felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, for the work would continue long after he was gone, but a recognition that his part in it had mattered. The Iron Shield had done its job, protecting American tanks and the men who crewed them. Now it was time for new shields, new protectors, new visionaries to carry forward the lessons so painfully learned. And somewhere, Harrington liked to think, Robert was watching, approving, perhaps even smiling at what his father had accomplished in his name. Not a bad legacy, all things considered. Not a bad legacy at all.